Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Jessica Camilleri. Jessica Camilleri was the younger daughter of Rita and Vince, an Australian couple of Maltese descent. Unlike her older sister Christie, Jessica was born with an intellectual disability. Jessica had an IQ of approximately 55 to 60, significantly lower than the average range of 90 to 110, which placed her in the lowest 1% and classified her as having a mild intellectual delay. Individuals with mild intellectual disabilities typically follow a different pace of development. They may start speaking, reading, writing, and doing math later than others, but can learn to communicate and express themselves in everyday situations. This delay caused her to start school later than her peers. As a result, she was vulnerable to teasing and bullying by classmates who did not understand her condition. Jessica coped with stress and anxiety by lashing out in intense anger, often targeting women. As a result, she developed intermittent explosive disorder. This mental health condition is characterized by sudden, recurring episodes of aggressive and violent behavior. Typically, intermittent explosive disorder starts in children around the age of 6 and worsens during the teenage years and early 20s. It is a mental health issue, not just a normal temper tantrum, and is linked to low levels of serotonin, a hormone in the brain that regulates emotions and mood. Jessica's behavior at school was causing problems, and she often lashed out at both students and teachers. In one incident, she physically hit a male student and refused to stop. As a result, she was suspended from school indefinitely and was forced to stay home under the care of her mother, Rita, who received a disability pension to support her. Jessica struggled with three main conditions: intellectual disability, which affected her cognitive abilities, irrational anger outbursts, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. ADHD is a chronic condition that affects the brain, making it difficult for people, especially children, to control their behavior. Jessica was diagnosed with several mental health conditions, including severe bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety. Additionally, she had autism spectrum disorders, which impacted her ability to understand her own thoughts and feelings, as well as empathize with others. The effects of autism also made everyday tasks, such as shopping, using public transportation, banking, and working, particularly challenging for her. Jessica had fixations on certain things, including 3 specific numbers: 2, 3, and 5. These numbers were linked in her mind to her favorite colors: yellow for 2, green for 3, and purple for 5. As a result of her fascination with these numbers, she would often create random phone numbers to dial, attempting to speak with men. In one instance, she repeatedly called a family's home in Bangladesh over 100 times a day solely because she liked their phone number. In 2018, her fixation turned to harassment when she began targeting a meat company in Daylesford, England. Her behavior became more uncontrollable, to the point of threatening company employees, including the owner Matthew Leafield, and his family, going so far as to claim she would harm them with a chainsaw. Jessica had an unrelenting fascination with horror movies and she couldn't shake off. She would spend an enormous amount of time rewatching violent videos, especially certain films that captured her attention. Her favorites included Saw, Jeepers Creepers, and, above all, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Released in 1974, the latter film was about young people in Texas being pursued by cannibals wielding chainsaws. The graphic violence in the movie led to it being banned in multiple countries, including Australia and the UK. When Jessica's mother, Rita, tried to stop her from watching these films, Jessica would become extremely angry. Jessica and her mother, Rita, resided in a St. Clair suburb of Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. Vince, Jessica's father, divorced Rita when Jessica was a teenager due to her behavioral problems. Her frequent tantrums put a strain on her parents' marriage, eventually leading to their breakup. Jessica appears to have conflicting personality traits. She has low self-esteem and is childish and naive. However, she often feels narcissistic, believing that she deserves special treatment due to her mental health needs. This thing sometimes made her take advantage of others and prioritize her own needs above theirs. However, Rita still always takes good care of her daughter. She knew her daughter had problems, but felt it was her responsibility to take care of and protect her. After discovering her daughter's harassing phone calls, Rita took the initiative to apologize. Although Jessica loved her family dearly, she was especially close to her mother, who made every effort to meet her needs and chose to care for her at home rather than seek full-time care at a psychiatric facility. In Australia, about 1 in 5 people, or 20% of the population, experienced a mental condition between 2017 and 2018. This equates to around 4.8 million people. Women are more prone to these problems than men. Young people aged 15 to 24 years were the most affected. A mental illness is a serious, diagnosable mental health condition. It affects a person's thoughts, feelings, and behavior and can impact their relationships with others. Examples of mental illnesses include depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and psychotic disorders. These conditions significantly affect individuals' emotions and relationships, not just them but also their families and caregivers. The tragic incident on July 20, 2019 was the culmination of a series of violent acts by Jessica. Her history of assaulting and violence others has been around for many years, with incidents including attacking the mother-in-law of her sister and aunt by pulling their hair. Despite her convictions, Jessica was never imprisoned and was always allowed to remain under the care of her mother. Rita, who seemed to be the only person who could accept her actions. Jessica exhibited aggressive behavior towards women in public places, such as streets and shopping centers, often because she perceived that they were staring at her in a way that made her feel uncomfortable or ashamed. This behavior reached a boiling point when she got into a physical altercation with another patient in a doctor's office waiting room, resulting in her being banned from the office. Jessica's aggressive behavior continued in 2018 when she physically attacked a nurse during a hospital visit. As a result, she was admitted to a mental health unit for 9 days to address a severe episode of her mood disorder. During her stay, she was treated with lithium, a medication commonly used to manage bipolar disorder, in addition to antipsychotic medications. In the months leading up to the crime, Jessica stopped taking her prescribed medication and instead turned to natural to manage her health conditions. At the same time, her mother, Rita, was looking for alternative ways to help Jessica. Rita even paid $2,500 to see a psychic in Sydney suburb who claims to be able to exorcise demons, an evil force that she believes is influencing Jessica. However, many relatives and friends were concerned that Jessica might pose a danger to those around her, but Rita remained convinced that her daughter was harmless. Jessica's older sister, Christie, described their mother, Rita, as a selfless person who always put benefit others first. This thing was especially evident in the way Rita cared for Jessica, who often rejected professional help. Rita's older sister also realized her unconditional love for Jessica and frequently expressed concerns that Jessica might harm her. However, Rita's motherly love clouded her judgment, causing her to overlook her older sister's concerns. In fact, the day before the fatal attack, Rita had to take Jessica to the police station because she had been making threatening phone calls to strangers. Yet she still chose to ignore the warning signs. On July 20, 2019, Jessica felt embarrassed when her mother scolded her in front of a stranger in a parking lot. The stranger simply walked by, unaware of the tension between them. After visiting her sister, Jessica and her mother returned home. Jessica then asked her mother to order additional food from Red Rooster, but her mother, Rita, declined. Jessica became upset and placed 3 separate calls to the restaurant at 9:18, 9:20, and 9:21 p.m. Additionally, Jessica asked her mother to call a doctor to come to their house. When the doctor arrived, he was frightened by Jessica's behavior and quickly left. He was pursued by Jessica until he managed to safely escape in his vehicle. Rita could no longer wait patiently, so she told Jessica that she had decided to call an ambulance and was to take Jessica to a mental health facility. Unfortunately, this led to Jessica's most severe episode of rage. That night, 57-year-old Rita was violently attacked by her daughter in her own kitchen. The assault began when Jessica dragged her mother by the hair into the kitchen, where had a collection of 7 meat cleavers. 4 of the 7 cleavers were broken during the attack, but Jessica continued to use the remaining ones to inflict harm. She stabbed her mother's head and neck more than 100 times, causing her mother severe mutilation. This brutal act was not solely a result of Jessica's anger, revealing a disturbing level of fascination with violence, likely fueled by her excessive daily consumption of horror movies. The forensic pathologist's autopsy revealed that Rita suffered severe injuries to her head and neck, resulting in her death from multiple stab wounds. The fatal blow was a severed spine at the second vertebra in her upper neck, essentially leaving her head partially detached. Notably, Rita had sustained over 90 defensive wounds, suggesting she was conscious and endured extreme pain and terror for a substantial portion of the attack. This horrific discovery is especially chilling since her own daughter, whom Rita had cared for and loved, was the one who inflicted the brutal violence. During the brutal attack, Jessica's 4-year-old nephew was present at the scene. He was the son of Jessica's older sister, Christie, and had been in Rita's care for a few days. The young boy witnessed Jessica attacking and beheading his grandmother. When he attempted to intervene, Jessica accidentally inflicted a minor head injury on him. The traumatic incident caused the boy to vomit, further adding to the horror of the scene. Jessica called the emergency number from her mother's cell phone after fatally hurt. During the call, Jessica claimed she acted in self-defense, stating that her mother, Rita, had attacked her first. This led to Jessica defending herself by stabbing Rita multiple times, eventually more than 100 times, and then beheading her. Following the incident, Jessica disposed of Rita's head in a nearby neighbor's yard. Upon arriving at the house in St. Clair, Sydney, New South Wales, police found Jessica outside. Her clothes stained with blood, holding a water bottle. What's striking, however, was Jessica's reaction to the situation. Rather than displaying remorse for her actions, Jessica expressed concern about her own future. She asked police officers and later detectives if it was possible to reattach her mother's head, seemingly holding onto the hope of a miraculous medical help that could bring Rita back to life. A police officer questioned the practicality of Jessica's plan, but she remained optimistic, believing that medical professionals could work miracles through surgery. Jessica also asked if she would face severe punishment, including the death penalty, for taking her mother's life. The officer informed her that Australia does not impose capital punishment, which brought her a sense of relief. Jessica then confessed to the police that her idea to decapitate her mother had originated from the horror movies she frequently watched. A disturbing conversation was captured on a police officer's body camera when they arrived at the scene at 11:43 p.m. on July 20, 2019. Upon arrival, first responders were met with a scene they described as one of the most horrific they had ever seen. The following day, July 21, 2019, Jessica appeared in court and chose not to request bail. According to a friend, this decision was not unexpected, as Jessica likely lacked understanding of the bail process. Jessica Camilleri was found guilty of manslaughter in December 2020 after a trial that focused on her long-standing mental health issues. Initially, she had pleaded not guilty to murder, citing her mental health reasons as a reason. In early 2021, she received a prison sentence of up to 21 years and 7 months, with a non-parole period of 16 years and 2 months. This means she will be eligible for parole on September 19, 2035. Christie expresses her grief and shock, revealing that her younger sister Jessica was responsible for their mother's tragic death. While hesitant to forgive Jessica, but Christie expressed hope that Jessica would receive the necessary support and care in prison. This thing helped Rita could finally rest in peace knowing that her daughter's needs were being met, something that had failed to happen during her lifetime. The judge in the case offered counseling to the jurors, acknowledging that the harrowing evidence they had heard would likely haunt them. The judge said that during jury selection, several individuals had refused to participate in the trial. She also stated that Rita's murder was one of the most serious murders the court had ever seen. She described it as a particularly heinous crime and horrifying because it occurred in the victim's own home. During the trial, Jessica's lawyer revealed that she had expressed remorse for her actions in a letter to her family. In the letter, Jessica acknowledged that Rita had not provoked her and took responsibility for her mother's death. Jessica was evaluated by a psychiatrist who noted that she often lacked facial expressions when communicating with others. Although Jessica showed limited emotions, she did not exhibit signs of schizophrenia or hallucinations. The psychiatrist's conclusion was that Jessica required long-term, comprehensive mental health support to manage her risk factors and address her underlying issues. Jessica was incarcerated in the strictest unit of the women's section at the correctional complex. Throughout her time in prison, she continued to engage in problematic behavior. An incident standout involved a dispute over food exchange on September 9, 2019, and she responded by throwing a teacup at another inmate. Although she was charged with assault in court the following day, she did not receive any additional punishment. There were several other notable incidents involving her during her imprisonment. She got into a fight with another inmate on October 14, 2019, and was punished with 5 days in solitary confinement. Additionally, she disobeyed an order on November 3, 2019, and damaged property on July 31, 2020, resulting in a fine of $200. Another assault incident occurred on November 21, 2020, for which she received 7 days in solitary confinement. In January 2021, she was convicted of common assault once more, but did not face any additional consequences. Jessica has defended her actions, explaining that no matter what she does or where she goes, other inmates will continue to cause her misery. She also pointed out that life behind bars is challenging and vastly different from life on the outside. One major issue in prisons is the high prevalence of mental health issues. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, in 2018, nearly half of Australian prisoners had been diagnosed with a mental health condition. Although there is no direct correlation between having a mental health condition and committing a crime, these statistics suggest that many prisoners in Australia struggled with mental health issues before their incarceration. Research has found a link between mental illnesses and in likelihood of committing crimes, especially among individuals with psychotic disorders. Symptoms of bipolar disorder can directly contribute to criminal acts, while extreme anxiety or stress can increase the risk of violent behavior due to heightened emotions and impulsivity. On the other hand, being in a prison environment can worsen existing mental health conditions. The harsh realities of prison life, including the potential for violence from inmates or staff, can trigger or worsen mental health issues. Prisons are considered especially inhospitable environments for individuals struggling with mental illness, as reported by the Australian Policy Development Centre. A significant decision was made in the Sydney Supreme Court on May 15, 2023, in the case of Jessica. The court, consisting of Justices Peter Hamill, Christine Adamson, and Richard Kavanagh, decided that Jessica's case should be retried due to exceptional circumstances. A significant factor in this decision was Jessica's unusual behavior following the crime. After beheading her mother, Jessica carried the head into the street and asked emergency services personnel if they could reattach it. This action showed that Jessica's understanding of reality was severely impaired. Several mental health experts, including psychiatrists and a psychologist, testified about Jessica's mental health. Their findings indicated that due to her intellectual disability and autism, she had difficulty distinguishing between right and wrong. As a result, Justice Hamill decided to re-sentence Jessica Camilleri to 16 years in prison, with the chance of parole in 12 years. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Natalie Connelly. Natalie Connelly is a beautiful and charming woman who has a stunning appearance identical to her twin sister. Her sister is equally beautiful, and they share a close bond not only because of their similar appearance but also because of their deep connection. Natalie has a special ability to bring joy to those around her. She can easily make people laugh and chat with anyone she meets. Despite facing the challenges of being a single mother, Natalie always strives to ensure that her daughter, Madison, does not lack anything. Her care and love for Madison are evident in her constant presence and attention. In a crowded bar, Natalie meets John, a charming and elegant man. They are attracted to each other from the beginning, and their relationship gradually blossoms. John's charm and wit quickly capture Natalie's heart. They exchange contact information and begin to delve deeper into their relationship. As Natalie spends more time with John, she feels an irresistible attraction to him. This was evident from the moment they first met, even though she had no idea of his profession or wealth at the time. As they grow closer, John reveals that he is a millionaire. His wealth is displayed through lavish gifts and fancy dinners at top restaurants. Natalie is fascinated by John's gentlemanly and elegant style, as well as his lavish mansion. However, behind John's charming exterior, there is much more mystery. His life is far more complicated than he lets on. While engaged to a pregnant partner and expecting a second child, John hides the existence of 3 other children. His relationship with Natalie is actually an affair, which continues even as John deals with the breakup of his previous relationship. Eventually, John chooses to turn his attention to Natalie. Their romance seems like a fairy tale from the start. John and Madison become close quickly, and Natalie soon wins the hearts of John's children. John treats Natalie to lavish and romantic experiences, from spa trips to hiring a chauffeur. It seems like he is making all her dreams come true. However, when Natalie moves in with John in Kinver, Stafford, England, the truth slowly emerges. Their relationship, initially fueled by passion, reveals its true nature once they live under the same roof. As they spend every waking moment together, they begin to understand each other better. However, John's interests start to annoy her. He enjoys intimate interactions and often leaves bruises and scratches. Romantic gestures and lavish dinners lose their appeal as Natalie realizes that she has to pay a high price for all of them. Natalie once thought her relationship with John was a fairy tale, but now she realizes the harsh truth behind it. Fearing abandonment, she still accepts John's demands during their intense sexual encounters. She recalls how John abandoned his pregnant ex-fiancée and fears the same thing will happen to her. Despite this, Natalie still feels fulfilled in the relationship and does not want to leave because she fears returning to her old monotonous life. She seeks comfort and guidance from her sister and mother, sharing the bruises and scratches John leaves during their intense sexual encounters. She admits that John enjoys causing her pain. Natalie faces a difficult situation as her relationship with John brings her happiness but also has negative aspects. She is caught in a dilemma of wanting to maintain her luxurious lifestyle with John while being dissatisfied with the intimate aspect of the relationship. The tension between them increases as they both seek out other relationships. As John continues to chat with other women, Natalie also begins texting other men without John's knowledge. When John discovers these exchanges, he becomes very angry. Although John makes no secret of his interactions with other women, he strongly objects to Natalie interacting with other men, highlighting the unfairness of their relationship. Despite John's attempts to hide his insecurities, he invites Natalie out for a casual evening on December 18, 2016, which includes drinks, football, and dinner. John forces Natalie to drink heavily and even offers her cocaine, albeit in smaller amounts than he consumes. This was not the first time he had created such a situation, suggesting a pattern of behavior intended to make Natalie more comfortable before committing bad acts on her when they were home alone. This raises the question of whether Natalie's heavy drinking on these occasions was an attempt to dull the pain she knew she would endure behind closed doors with him. John wanted to be in complete control of the situation, ensuring he could carry out his intentions towards Natalie without being hindered. Therefore, he carefully controlled his alcohol intake, aiming to achieve a mild state of intoxication that did not affect his performance during their sexual encounters. After what seemed like a pleasant day out, ending with a satisfying meal at one of their favorite places, John arranged for a driver to take them home. However, beneath the normal appearance, John's evil intentions were hidden. That day, Natalie was in a drunken state, which only worsened as dinner failed to sober her up or absorb the alcohol. She was disoriented, stumbling out of the car as they arrived home, accidentally leaving her phone behind. Instead of letting Natalie recover from her drunkenness, John had other intentions. He returned to retrieve Natalie's phone, but it is unclear whether he had seen her messages. Natalie became the victim of John's cruel actions as he attempted to inflict maximum harm on her. He attacked her in various ways, including punching, kicking, stomping, and the disgusting act of throwing bleach at her face and genitals. To add to her pain, John used a bottle of carpet cleaner, using its nozzle as a weapon. After the attack, he left Natalie naked and bloody at the bottom of the stairs, her dress pulled up around her waist, leaving her to suffer from her injuries. Natalie lay motionless in a pool of blood when John left the bed. A few hours later, when he awoke, he discovered that Natalie had died from the severe injuries she had sustained, totaling 40. John's subsequent actions, including his nonchalant call to emergency services, revealed his twisted mentality. He showed no emotion or remorse when he informed the paramedics of his futile attempts at CPR and referred to Natalie's unresponsive state with indifference. As the paramedics loaded Natalie's body into the ambulance, John remained silent and emotionless, observing the tragic consequences of his actions. After Natalie was pronounced dead, John was arrested. To justify his cruel actions, John made the excuse that the rough sex had gone too far and claimed his innocence. He alleged that Natalie had consented to the rough actions, claiming that she had initiated them and that she had been the one who desired all these brutal actions. According to John, Natalie allegedly requested rough sex, including being injured, beaten, and even having a bottle of carpet cleaner inserted into her. John claimed that, despite bleeding and in pain, Natalie allegedly reassured him that she was safe and wanted to continue. However, John's account is not credible. He attempted to deflect blame by saying that Natalie had agreed to engage in rough sex and that they had engaged in similar acts many times without issue. When asked about leaving Natalie partially clothed at the bottom of the stairs, John offered a weak excuse, claiming it was a regular occurrence and that he had never provided a blanket because the house was always warm. Throughout the proceedings, John showed no remorse or regret for his actions. Instead, he placed the blame squarely on Natalie. His attempts to shift the blame left onlookers frustrated. Despite being convicted of manslaughter, John received a lenient sentence of 3 years and 8 months, but only served 22 months before being released. Natalie Connelly's case sparked widespread criticism and controversy, leading Fiona McKenzie to launch the "We Can't Agree with This" movement in December 2018. The movement aims to promote discussion about sexual assault and calls for the removal of the rough sex defense. In Fiona's view, the defense minimizes and legitimizes violence in intimate relationships, perpetuates harmful stereotypes, and devalues the experiences of survivors. However, in interviews, Fiona has been surprised that some people, despite disagreeing with the court's decision, have accepted it. The reason for this acceptance is that they believe the incident was isolated, not a systemic problem. However, this way of thinking often leads to victim blaming, with survivors being held responsible for the risks that may have resulted from their behavior. Such attitudes highlight the need for continued advocacy and education to challenge harmful beliefs and support survivors of sexual violence. The Domestic Violence Bill was passed by Parliament on July 6, 2020, and following royal assent on April 29, 2021, it became law and is known as the Domestic Violence Act 2021. This marks a significant step forward in combating domestic violence and preventing perpetrators from using harmful excuses to justify their actions. Natalie's loss has left a deep void in the lives of her family and friends. They are still grappling with the pain of her loss. However, their unwavering love and support for Natalie is a testament to her strong and resilient spirit. The community has come together to raise awareness of domestic violence and support survivors on their journeys to healing and recovery. Their solidarity and compassion are an inspiration and hope to those struggling. Although Natalie Connelly's life was tragically cut short, her memory will live on in the hearts of those who knew and loved her. Her story will hopefully inspire us to come together to fight domestic violence and support those in need. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lynette White. Lynette White was a beautiful young woman from Cardiff, Wales. Due to difficult circumstances, she had to support herself through prostitution since she was 14 years old. Although this was not Lynette's childhood dream, it was the path she was forced to choose. Before her murder, Lynette had given an interview to BBC Wales journalist Tim Rogers, who was investigating child prostitution. In this conversation, Lynette shared how she had been abused, taken to Bristol, and forced into prostitution. Although Lynette managed to return to Cardiff, she was still unable to escape this dangerous life. By 1988, when Lynette was 20 years old, she had become a well-known prostitute on the streets of Cardiff. With her beautiful appearance and high regard among her friends, Lynette was one of the top prostitutes in the city. She went to work every day, earning around £100 a night. People often thought that Lynette White was trying her best to make a better life, but the reality was quite different. She worked hard just to pay for her boyfriend Stephen Miller's cocaine addiction. Every day, Stephen took large amounts of money from Lynette, who was his only source of income. Lynette and Stephen lived together in a flat on Dorset Street, Cardiff. Every day, Stephen drove Lynette to work in Riverside, Cardiff, and then went to the North Star Club in the evening to collect her earnings. Lynette's life took a new turn when Leanne, a friend of Lynette's, lent her the keys to a flat. The purpose of this was for Lynette to take clients there for sex. On the evening of February 14, 1988, Leanne went to the flat as she presumably wanted to use it. However, when she got there, Leanne found the door locked, which was quite unusual. Leanne became very concerned about Lynette and went to Butte Town Police Station to report her missing. The police went with Leanne to her James Street flat. They entered the flat and found Lynette lying in a pool of her own blood. She had died from severe injuries. A post-mortem examination by forensic pathologist Bernard Knight revealed that Lynette had been stabbed more than 50 times in various parts of her body, including her chest, face, abdomen, wrists, arms, hands, and thighs. In particular, her throat had been brutally slashed from ear to ear. Although Lynette had been stabbed multiple times, her cause of death was the injury to her throat. The medical examiner determined that Lynette was murdered on February 14, between 1:45 a.m. and 4 a.m. Lynette's body was found between the foot of her bed and the window, covered in blood. An autopsy revealed that semen containing no sperm was found in Lynette's vagina and on her underwear. Additionally, 2 different blood types were found on Lynette, including her own blood and blood type AB, which was not Lynette's. After news of Lynette's death spread, police began to investigate the case further. Several witnesses reported seeing a distressed man in the area near where Lynette's body was found on James Street. The man looked suspicious and appeared to have blood on his hands. The suspicious man was described as a white man, about 5 feet 10 inches tall and in his mid-30s. Police focused their search on him and eventually arrested a man matching the description. However, he was released after providing an alibi. Police also investigated Stephen, Lynette's boyfriend, as the victim's partner is often the first suspect. Stephen was questioned but was later released because his blood type did not match the blood type found on Lynette. In addition, the police also investigated Francine Cordell and his mother because Lynette was scheduled to testify against Francine in court in an unrelated case. However, both were also ruled out as suspects because their blood did not match the AB blood type found on Lynette. With no leads, the police had to rely on statements collected from the house-to-house investigation. In particular, 2 people gave suspicious statements. They were Mark Gromick, who lived in the apartment above where Lynette was murdered, and his friend, Paul Atkins. In their testimonies, Mark and Paul gave 4 completely different statements. Therefore, the investigators did not take these statements seriously. The police collected more statements related to Lynette's murder. Ronnie Williams, a police informant, gave statements implicating his brother-in-law, Yusef Abdullahi. However, the strained relationship between Ronnie and Yusef led the police to doubt and dismiss this account. Leanne Vilde, who reported Lynette missing on the day of her death, was also a suspect. After intense questioning, she gave a drunken statement naming Stephen and Yusef as the killers. Another eyewitness, Violet Piriam, a secretary at the Cardiff Yacht Club, shed light on the case. 8 months into the investigation, she recalled a crucial detail. On February 14th, while driving home from the club at around 1:30 a.m., she saw 4 excited black men outside the building where Lynette was killed. 2 of them, in particular, she identified as John Actie and Rashid Omar. Piriam's testimony opened a new line of inquiry into the case. Angela Sila, who has a mild intellectual disability, gave a crucial testimony. She said she saw Stephen, John, Rashid, Ronnie Actie, John's cousin Tony Paris, and Tony Brace outside 7 James Street on the day Lynette was murdered. This testimony was important because it matched Violet's testimony and further implicated Yusef, John Stephen, and others. On the same day, Mark and Paul also provided new testimony. They said they saw a group of men, including Ronnie and Yusef. Angela Sila then gave another testimony in December 1988. She said she heard screams from Lynette's flat and ran there with Leanne. Leanne gave a similar testimony on the same day, saying she went to the flat after hearing Lynette's screams and met Stephen, Yusef, Ronnie Actie, Stephen's brother, and an unnamed mixed-race man. However, Angela Sila later got into trouble. She had type AB blood, and police found her blood on Lynette's socks. Sila later gave a new confession, admitting that she was part of the murder, along with Leanne and others. Leanne also admitted that she was forced to cut Lynette's wrists to ensure her complicity and silence. With no way out, Stephen confessed to killing Lynette after 307 denials. He also named other men involved, leading to the arrest of all those accused of the murder. Specifically, the police arrested Stephen Miller, Tony Stephen, Yusef Abdullahi, Ronnie Actie, Rashid Omar, and Martin Tucker on December 7, 1988. 2 days later, John Actie and Tony Paris were also arrested. After nearly a year in custody, their trial began on October 5, 1989 at Swansea Crown Court. It was the longest murder trial in British legal history, lasting 197 days. After 2 years in custody, Ronnie Actie and John Actie were acquitted of murder. Meanwhile, Tony Paris, Stephen Miller, and Youssef Abdullahi were convicted. Each was sentenced to life imprisonment and was known as the Cardiff Three. However, there was no forensic evidence linking the men to the crime scene, which created many doubts and questions about the verdict. Friends and family of the Cardiff Three began a campaign to overturn the verdict. The campaign received widespread support and was followed up by television documentaries in 1992. The Cardiff Three's appeal was finally accepted in December 1992. After hearing Stephen's interrogation, Judge Taylor decided that the police had been abusive in their questioning of Stephen. Therefore, the veracity of Stephen's testimony was no longer important. In the end, the Cardiff Three were acquitted. Their conviction was deemed unsafe and insufficiently supported. However, if the Cardiff Three were not the real criminals, then the real criminal is still at large. This raises the question, who killed Lynette White? 8 years later, the case was reopened. This time, Professor Dave Barkley and Police Chief Kevin O'Neill were assigned to investigate. The case led the police back to the crime scene, where the incident had occurred 12 years earlier. While reviewing old photos of the crime scene, Professor Barkley discovered a crucial detail that no one else had seen all these years: a large drop of blood that might have been splattered from a knife onto the wallpaper. When the crime occurred in 1988, the police had collected several pieces of wallpaper from the apartment as evidence. Upon searching through the old evidence, they discovered that the only missing piece of wallpaper was the one containing the large drop of blood. The forensic team continued to investigate the case, carefully studying photos of the scene. They discovered that the blood might have been hidden under several layers of paint on the baseboards. The team also found traces of blood on a piece of cellophane from a cigarette packet, leading to the suspect being nicknamed Cellophane Man. To find the suspect, the forensic team led by Angela Gallup began collecting and comparing DNA data. However, searching for a matching DNA profile in 140 police databases proved futile as no matches were found. But the forensic team did not give up. They narrowed down the search to hundreds of profiles in the Cardiff area by comparing similar DNA profiles. They eventually found a match between the suspect's DNA profile and that of a 14-year-old boy who was known to the police for driving around Cardiff. Surprisingly, the boy could not be a suspect because he had not been born at the time of the crime 15 years ago. The police still visited the boy's home to investigate. There, they were told that the boy's father had died but that he had an uncle named Jeffrey Gafford. On February 26, 2003, detectives went to Jeffrey's home in the village of Hanharan, 15 miles west of Cardiff. However, Jeffrey's house was empty at the time. The next morning, police went to his workplace in an office building in Cardiff city centre. When they explained the purpose of their visit, Jeffrey said, "I think you've got someone for the job." Jeffrey was then asked to provide a mouth swab, which he agreed to do. The police immediately analyzed the swab and identified a clue that would lead to the murderer. The next morning, Superintendent Kevin O'Neill wanted to get things right so there would be no more mistakes. He assigned a team to watch Jeffrey before he began interviewing him. Chief O'Neill had planned to monitor Jeffrey for a week, but on February 28, 2003, Jeffrey attempted suicide. When the surveillance team caught him in a garage, where he had bought 3 packets of paracetamol, the police immediately took action. When the police arrived at Jeffrey's home, he had taken approximately 62 paracetamol tablets, a significant amount of painkillers. Despite this, Jeffrey tried to hide his actions. When questioned, he made a horrifying confession: "I killed Lynette White. I've been waiting for this for 15 years. I think I deserve this sentence. I really hope to die." Jeffrey was then taken to the hospital, where he once again confessed to the murder he had committed 15 years earlier. Initially refusing treatment, Jeffrey prepared himself to accept death. But he eventually agreed to take the antidote and recovered within a few days. On July 4, 2003, Jeffrey pleaded guilty to the murder of Lynette White in court. Judge Royce sentenced Jeffrey to life imprisonment with a minimum of 12 years and 8 months. Jeffrey's lawyer later revealed that Jeffrey had killed Lynette for over 30 pounds and had sexually assaulted her body. In February 2007, Paul Atkins, Angela Sila, Leanne Vilde, and Mark Gromick were charged with perjury. By December 2008, 3 of them, Angela Sila, Leanne Vilde, and Mark Gromick, were convicted and each sentenced to 18 months in prison. However, Paul Atkins was acquitted because it was believed he had been bullied, threatened, abused, and manipulated into making false statements. In March 2009, it was announced that the prosecution had enough evidence to charge the officers involved in the original investigation for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. However, in 2011, the trial was dropped due to a lack of evidence. In 2015, 8 of the accused officers brought a civil suit in the High Court against the police force, suing for malicious prosecution, unlawful detention, and wrongful conduct. However, in late 2015, the judge in the civil case dismissed their case. 5 of the wrongfully accused men were awarded compensation after their release. Stephen Miller was paid £571,000, John Actie received £300,000, while Tony Paris was awarded £250,000. 2 other men, Ron Actie and Yusuf Abdullahi, have since died. Ronnie Actie died in 2007 after struggling to come to terms with what had happened to him. Yusuf Abdullahi died in 2011 from cancer after battling post-traumatic stress disorder. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shenthia Gardner. Shenthia Gardner was born in the late 1980s in Memphis, Tennessee. Not much is known about her early life. She is the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass from Madison, Alabama. Shenthia was a slim, beautiful brunette with curly hair as a child. Shenthia was a multi-talented person. Her creative spirit was evident in her songwriting abilities, which helped her become a local celebrity. Shenthia also has a keen eye for fashion and photography, attends church regularly, and spends time with her family. Shenthia seems well-rounded and full of promise for a bright future. Shenthia met Daryl Clayton when she was 14 years old. They became close friends. As they grew up and graduated from high school, their friendship turned into love. Shenthia and Daryl often spent time together. In 2008, Daryl was accused of assaulting a woman, albeit unintentionally, which led to charges being filed against him. Fortunately for him, the charges were eventually dropped. Shenthia and Daryl did not get married, but they decided to live together as a couple. In 2008, they had a son named Kason. Shenthia took on a motherly role, not only to her own son but also to Daryl's 2 children from a previous relationship. Shenthia was a devoted mother and caring partner, which made her special to those around her. Although Sheninthia's relationship with Daryl did not last long, to Daryl, Shenthia remained a loving wife and mother. Her life took a new turn when Shenthia married Martin Gardner, the man who brought her joy and gave her a stable life. Shenthia won Martin over with her kindness, love for children, and gentle nature. Their relationship developed quickly, and in September 2013, they decided to start a life together, moving into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. Their wedding marked the beginning. Shenthia and her husband Martin started their family with the arrival of their first child, baby Talon Gardner. Their family grew as little Saya Gardner was born in 2014, followed by 2 more girls, Savi and Yahtzee. Martin and Shenthia had 4 children together, in addition to a child from her previous relationship, creating a busy and happy home. Shenthia prioritizes her family's health and also enjoys her part-time job at the Children's Hospital. Additionally, she supports a charity center that focuses on raising funds to support children. Her compassionate nature fuels her passion to dedicate her life to helping others. On July 1, 2016, Martin had a phone conversation with Shenthia around noon as she was getting ready to watch a movie with their children. The couple were chatting quietly. Shenthia suddenly lost control and grabbed a kitchen knife. She walked into the living room, where she brutally attacked her 6-month-old daughter, Yahtzee, without any apparent reason or provocation. The innocent child, unable to defend herself, was tragically killed at the hands of her mother. The eldest child, a 7-year-old boy named Cason, witnessed the horrific scene. Too young to understand the situation, the boy ran away from home. Shenthia, still armed with the knife, pursued her son out of the house, intent on continuing her violent rampage. The boy's terrified screams caught the attention of nearby neighbors. Realizing that the neighbor had seen Cason, Shenthia immediately stopped. She returned to the house where Savi and Talon were lying. Upon entering the house, Shenthia rushed to the bedroom where her young children were lying and rushed to kill them. Neighbors who witnessed the horrific scene quickly contacted the police for assistance, pleading for help in rescuing Cason and his siblings. The police arrived at Sheninthia's home. They found Shenthia covered in blood, along with her 4 dead children. The scene shocked everyone. Shenthia, still holding her cell phone in her hand, calmly called her husband Martin and confessed to killing the children. By the time the police arrived, the incident was over, and an eerie silence had fallen over the once happy home of the Shenthia family. The house was now a scene of horror, with blood stains in every corner. A bloody knife, recovered by the police. When clergy and police arrived to assist, they were confronted with a horrifying reality. The police began gathering information and conducting an investigation. Shenthia was held without bail and her trial is scheduled for July 5. Michelle Jaiman, Sheninthia's co-worker, defended Shenthia on social media. Michelle highlighted the possibility of Shenthia suffering from postpartum depression. Cases like Sheninthia's have sparked discussions about mental illness and such tragic events. Dr. Joel Rissman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that mothers killing their children is extremely rare and is usually related to underlying mental health issues. Dr. Diane Barnes, an expert in psychology and postpartum health, made a crucial distinction between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. According to her, these are 2 distinct conditions with unique symptoms. Dr. Diane cast doubt on the idea that Shenthia Gardner was suffering from postpartum depression at the time of her actions. Craig Morton was appointed as Sheninthia's defense attorney. During the July 5, 2016 court hearing, Shenthia participated via video link, but remained completely silent, not answering any questions from Judge L. Lambert. After the trial, Shenthia was admitted to a mental health institute. Meanwhile, Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols were preparing to file a warrant for evidence gathered in the case. In January 2017, Shenthia faced formal charges on 4 counts, 2 counts of child abuse, 1 count of aggravated murder, and 1 count of child neglect. Her mother, Sonia, was shocked and confused when she learned about the horrific incident and immediately rushed to the scene to find her grandson. Initially, Sonia suspected that Shenthia and Martin were divorcing, and the prospect of raising 5 children alone may have driven Shenthia to make the desperate decision. Sheninthia's ex-husband, Cason's father, said, although he was not his son's guardian after the relationship ended, he was still able to visit Cason whenever he wanted. However, the last time he saw his son was in November 2014. He noticed that Sheninthia's behavior was becoming more and more extreme. Every time he tried to contact Cason, he was unsuccessful. Those close to Shenthia observed a change in her. She began to feel irritable, which gradually turned into anxiety, paranoia, and panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, leading many to suspect that she might be suffering from postpartum depression. This change shocked those around her, as Shenthia had previously been a kind person, and the sudden change in her behavior left many wondering what had led to this tragic situation. The first signs of unusual behavior began in March 2015. Shenthia Gardner left work and picked up her 5 children. She then drove away from her Memphis home, down an unfamiliar road. Her husband, Martin Gardner, initially thought she had gone for a walk in a nearby park to clear her head. However, as hours passed and Shenthia did not return home, Martin became concerned and decided to report her missing to the police. He put out an alert for her car, which contained her and their 5 children. Unknown to Martin, Shenthia had driven more than 74 miles east to Corinth, a place where she had no relatives. She was eventually found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, although the circumstances surrounding her arrival remain unclear. Upon examination, medical staff discovered shallow cuts to Sheninthia's neck and one wrist. It appeared she had attempted to harm herself, leaving many questions unanswered for her young children, who were too young to fully understand the situation. Following her return home, Sheninthia's behavior became increasingly strange. She claimed that someone was threatening her and her family, but she provided no details about the identity of the person or their motives. Martin was shocked, as there had been no previous threats or incidents. Additionally, Shenthia began expressing dissatisfaction with her job and workload when around family and friends, stating that she felt terrible about it. She eventually started claiming that some of her co-workers were out to harm her. Despite these erratic claims, Shenthia did not display any signs of violent or abusive behavior towards her children or others. Shenthia Gardner's trial begins in 2021. Her defense team is focusing on her mental illness. The judge, James of the Shelby County Criminal Court, rejected the defense's argument, and in December 2021, Shenthia Gardner was found guilty of all charges. Shenthia Gardner, then 34, was sentenced in February 2022. She received a life sentence for each murder charge and 15 years for each count of child abuse and neglect. Due to Tennessee's laws, Shenthia Gardner will be eligible for parole after serving a total of 51 years in prison. After the sentencing, the prosecutor expressed his agreement with the decision, stating that it aligned with his goal of achieving justice for Martin and his children. Martin felt a sense of relief knowing that Shenthia would no longer be able to harm any children. A vigil was held at the apartment complex where the family lived, attended by neighbors, family members, law enforcement officers, and others. Sonia, the grandmother of one of the victims, was among those in attendance. The group lit red and white candles and prayed for the victims. Following the loss, Martin's colleagues set up a social media account to help him prepare for the funeral of his 4 children. During the service, Martin gave an emotional final speech, recalling his home as a place filled with happiness when his children and Shenthia were present, and expressing his intention to keep that memory alive. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Susan Reinert. Susan Reinert, known to many as Sue, was born in 1943 in the town of Ridgeway, northwestern Pennsylvania. Her parents, William and Jane Gallagher, were a significant influence on her early life. Her father managed a newspaper, while her mother was a dedicated school teacher, which later shaped her path. As a child, Susan demonstrated a clear passion for learning and a natural love for literature, following in her mother's footsteps. She pursued higher education at Grove City College, where she met Kenneth Reinert, a young Air Force enlistee. Their chance encounter blossomed into a romance as they studied together. Susan's determination paid off as she earned her bachelor's degree. After achieving her initial goal, Susan pursued further education, earning a master's degree in English from Pennsylvania State University in 1966. She had married Kenneth in 1965, shortly after graduating from Grove City College, and they began a life filled with adventure as a military couple, moving to various duty stations across the country. Their military life took them to different parts of the country, including Sacramento, California, Rome, New York, and even Puerto Rico, before they eventually settled in the Philadelphia region. However, in 1971, Susan and Kenneth decided to separate, marking the end of their marriage. Despite the divorce, they parted ways amicably, without any legal disputes. As a single mother, Susan focused on creating a warm and loving home for her two children, Karen and Michael. She was a dedicated teacher and a beloved colleague and educator at Chestnut Wald Elementary School, known for her friendly and warm nature. Outside of her professional life, Susan was actively involved in Parents Without Partners, playing a crucial role in the Valley Forge chapter. After her mother's death, Susan found comfort in her connection with the organization Parents Without Partners. Despite facing challenges, she remained strong, relying on the organization for support. As she navigated her grief and a significant inheritance, her life became increasingly complex. However, she seemed to be managing well thanks to her strong ability to cope and a supportive network. On the evening of June 22, 1979, Susan and her two children spent what would be their last day together. Earlier that day, her son Michael had spent time with his father Kenneth, a personnel officer at Fidelity Bank. They had played in a father-son softball game, but left early when Susan arrived to pick Michael up around 8:30 p.m. Later that evening, Michael called his father to apologize for leaving the game early. Susan also called her former in-laws, Florence and John Reinert, with whom she remained close despite her divorce. With a full tank of gas, Susan was prepared for the drive to Allentown, Pennsylvania, about an hour north. She planned to attend a Parents Without Partners conference and use the trip as a weekend getaway with her children. Susan had planned a weekend getaway with her two children, Karen, 11 years old, and Michael, 10 years old. They were supposed to leave on Saturday morning to attend events, but on Friday evening, around 9 p.m., they unexpectedly departed. The children had been outside collecting hailstones from a summer storm, and shortly after, neighbors heard Susan's car start up and saw it leave the driveway. Susan had been having an affair with William Bradfield, a fellow teacher, which had put a strain on her marriage to Kenneth. Rumors had circulated that Susan and Bradfield might get married. On June 22, 1979, Susan visited her boyfriend before embarking on a trip with her children to Allentown, about 49 miles north. They had planned to spend the night in a motel, but instead of arriving at their destination, Susan and her children vanished. 2 days after Susan Reinert and her children vanished, the community cared for them deeply was overcome with concern and uncertainty. On June 25, 1979, their fears were realized when Susan's orange Plymouth hatchback was found in the Hostin Hotel parking lot in Harrisburg, 87 miles from Allentown and 97 miles from her home. Tragically, her body was discovered in the back of the vehicle. The details of her death were horrific. Susan's body was found nude, battered, and bound in chains, curled up in the wheel well of her car. Her hands were tied, and she had 2 black eyes. It appeared that she had been either beaten with chains or tied so tightly that the chains had caused severe bruising on her back. To make matters worse, she had been given a lethal dose of morphine. The disappearance of her 2 children remained a mystery, however, with no signs of their whereabouts. Police were left searching for answers, with the children seemingly vanished into thin air. The police searched for hours, hoping to find Susan's children with a babysitter, but none of her regular sitters, friends, or family members had seen them that weekend. As a result, the police began investigating to find answers. To gather leads, the police published pictures of the Reinert family in newspapers for weeks. This was before the internet and Amber Alerts existed, making it more challenging to disseminate information quickly. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that Susan Reinert had named William Bradfield, the man she believed she would marry, as the beneficiary of life insurance policies worth $730,000. This revelation raised suspicions that the children might have been killed to allow Bradfield to receive the substantial financial windfall. However, Bradfield had a solid alibi, as he was at the beach in Cape May, New Jersey, during the weekend when Susan was killed and her children disappeared. Several other teachers were with him and could vouch for his whereabouts. The police then shifted their focus to Upper Marin High School, where Susan worked. The school was facing several difficulties and challenges. The principal, J.C. Smith, had been involved in a scandal. He had been fired the previous year, being arrested at a local shopping center, where a search of his Ford Granada revealed loaded handguns, a hooded mask, and various tools associated with burglary. Additionally, a syringe filled with morphine was found in his trunk. Jay's life was already unraveling before his wife's cancer diagnosis. In 1977, his wife was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, which she would eventually succumb to in August 1979. During her illness, she kept a diary, documenting her husband's increasingly bizarre behavior. Jay had begun engaging in consensual non-monogamous activities, including group sex and partner swapping, to which his wife strongly objected. This behavior seemed to be a precursor to even more alarming actions. Around the same time, their daughter, Stephanie, moved back in with her parents, bringing her husband Edward Hunsberger with her. The family was already dealing with the uncertainty of her mother's cancer battle, and tensions were running high among them. Edward Hunsberger and his wife Stephanie, Jay's daughter and son-in-law, struggled with heroin addiction and had trouble finding steady employment in the years leading up to their move. In an effort to escape their struggles with addiction, they moved back in with Jay family in early 1978. However, just a few months after the move, Stephanie and Edward mysteriously vanished. The last confirmed sighting of they was in February 1978, when they visited Edward's parents in North Wales, Pennsylvania. Before leaving, they mentioned that they would return to visit soon. However, after this point, all contact with them ceased. Edward failed to appear at a scheduled meeting with his probation officer later that month, prompting authorities to begin searching for him and Stephanie. When investigators reached out to Jay for information, he claimed that they had left for California to escape debts owed to local drug dealers. Despite his assertions, Jay was unable to provide any further details about their disappearance. Edward and Stephanie had been constantly on the move, traveling from place to place and never staying in one location for too long, making it easy for them to disappear without anyone noticing. Meanwhile, Jay was arrested for theft, and a search of his home uncovered some disturbing items. Authorities found firearms, marijuana, prescription pills, security guard uniforms and badges, as well as disturbing pornography. They also discovered nitric acid and stolen office equipment from a local school. Jay was linked to a string of recent armed robberies matching his description and attire. While awaiting sentencing for the theft charge, Jay's alibi witness, Bradfield, testified that they were on vacation during the time of the robberies. However, the jury did not find Bradfield's testimony credible. Jay had a notorious reputation at Upper Merion, earning him the nickname, the Prince of Darkness. This was especially relevant in the investigation of Susan's death, which was caused by strangulation or suffocation. The time frame for her death was broad, and when questioned about his whereabouts, Jay couldn't provide a clear answer. The autopsy found that Susan's body had an extremely high amount of morphine, roughly 10 times the amount needed to be fatal, which indicates that her overdose was likely a deliberate act. As the investigation into Susan's death continued, Jay was found guilty of a series of store robberies in the late 1970s. He was sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison on June 25, 1979. However, even behind bars, Jay remained a key suspect in the investigation into Susan's death. The police began to dig deeper into his past, uncovering a disturbing discovery. Jay's daughter and son-in-law had gone missing in similar circumstances to Susan and her children. There were two main connections between Jay and the disappearances. Firstly, large quantities of morphine had been discovered in Jay's house a few months earlier. Secondly, a plastic comb with Jay's military unit was found in Susan's car. The disappearances of Jay's daughter and son-in-law shared striking similarities with the disappearance of Susan's children. The investigation revealed a shocking series of events that had a lasting impact on the public. However, the most shocking revelation was yet to come. In late July 1979, about a month after Susan's body was discovered near Harrisburg, investigators stumbled upon a potential motive for the crime. In her official documents, Susan referred to Bradfield as her future husband. As the police investigated further, they determined that Susan's death occurred between midnight on Saturday, June 23, 1979, and midnight on Sunday, June 24. Bradfield and his colleagues arrived in Cape Cod at 5 a.m. on Saturday and stayed until Monday afternoon, June 25. However, there was a gap in Bradfield's alibi, as his exact whereabouts during the time of Susan's disappearance were unclear. Investigations also revealed that Susan had withdrawn large sums of money from her accounts, totaling around $25,000. She had told bank employees that she planned to invest the money in high-yielding investments managed by Bradfield, whom she trusted as her future husband. Unbeknownst to Susan, Bradfield was leading a double life, dating multiple women, including a fellow English teacher, with whom he had a secret relationship spanning nearly a decade. Bradfield had promised Susan that he would handle her investments and assured her they would be profitable, providing a way for they to fund their upcoming wedding and move to England. However, investigators found fake stocks and bonds in Susan's home, which were actually forgeries created by Bradfield. He had sold these worthless securities to Susan, using fictional companies to make them appear legitimate. This discovery added a new dimension to the narrative, revealing a significant financial motive. Bradfield was required to testify in a lawsuit in March 1980 but initially refused to answer questions, referring them to his lawyers instead. His lawyers denied any wrongdoing but were open to negotiating a settlement to resolve the matter and distribute Susan's estate, which was worth approximately $7 million. In June 1980, Bradfield testified in a civil trial, downplaying his involvement in the case. He contradicted Susan's claims about their relationship, saying it was not as serious as she had told others. He denied plans to marry Susan later that year, despite her having shared these plans with multiple people. Bradfield also made an unsubstantiated claim that Susan had an affair with Jay Smith, the former principal of her high school, but this accusation was not supported by any evidence. Friends and family members remembered Susan being in a long-term relationship with Bradfield, with no indication of a relationship with Jay Smith, who was actually in prison at the time of the trial. Bradfield failed to explain why Susan had named him the beneficiary of her $1 million estate. Instead, he portrayed Susan as an irresponsible person who frequently got into trouble, and he blamed her for her problems, claiming he was only trying to help her deal with the consequences. As the investigation into the missing $25,000 continued, Susan's brother and ex-husband filed a second lawsuit in June 1980 to claim the $450,000 life insurance policy taken out on Susan's life just before her death. The goal was to use the funds to conduct a private investigation. However, the case took a surprising turn when Bradfield was arrested on February 20, 1981, and charged with 2 counts of theft and 1 count of conspiracy related to the $25,000. Wendy Ziegler, a former student of Bradfield's, was also charged as a co-conspirator in the case. Bradfield was released on bail on February 23, 1981, and was set to go on trial the following month. However, the trial was preempted when the original civil lawsuit was settled out of court. As a result of the settlement, $36,000 from Susan's estate was set aside to cover the costs of further investigations into the disappearance of the children and to contest certain provisions of Susan's will. Bradfield's 5-day trial ended on August 3, 1981, with a guilty verdict for theft. The prosecutor, Edward Weiss, requested that Bradfield's bond be increased from $25,000 to $75,000 due to concerns that the conviction would increase the risk of him fleeing, particularly in light of potential murder charges. Judge Robert A. Wright granted this request. On April 6, 1983, Pennsylvania state troopers arrested Bradfield and charged him with multiple crimes, including 3 counts of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and obstructing the law. A grand jury found evidence that Bradfield was aware of the plot to kill Susan and her children and had likely participated in these crimes. Although J.C. Smith, a suspected accomplice, was not charged at that time, a confession from a fellow inmate, Proctor Noel, implicated Bradfield. Noel stated that while playing chess with Bradfield in prison, Bradfield revealed his involvement in the murders. Despite the lack of direct physical evidence linking Bradfield to the crimes, prosecutors felt they had a strong case against him. A previous conviction for theft also bolstered their confidence, as did a potential connection to a person who may have disposed of the victims' bodies, which further implicated Bradfield in the murders that occurred in the 1980s. J.C. Smith was forced to testify before a grand jury in 1984, despite invoking his Fifth Amendment right. The questioning was likely related to the disappearance of his daughter, Stephanie, and her husband, Edward Huntsberger. Around the same time, William Bradfield was also called to testify, but the details of his statements were not made public. In April 1985, J.C. Smith was asked to provide handwriting samples that may have been linked to documents written years earlier, possibly outlining a plan to murder Susan Reinert. This led to Jay's arrest on June 25, 1985, exactly 6 years after Susan's body was found. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and taken into custody. While Jay awaited trial, a book about the case was published by crime author Joseph Wambaugh in 1984, suggesting that Smith was the killer. The book was later adapted into a TV miniseries, drawing national attention to the case. Despite this, Jay maintained his innocence from prison, filing appeals and claiming that William Bradfield had framed him. In 1989, the court decided to re-examine Jay's case and discovered problems with the prosecution's handling of the case. This led to a new trial in 1990. Jay waived his right to a speedy trial to allow for a thorough investigation. By 1992, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in Jay's favor, overturning his murder conviction due to issues with the prosecution's conduct. For 20 years, the state did not pursue a new trial against J.C. Smith, allowing him to live the rest of his life without further prosecution. Meanwhile, William Bradfield continuously disregarded court orders and refused to pay the $25,000 he owed to the estate of Susan Reinert. This issue was finally resolved in a settlement in 1996. J.C. Smith went on to file lawsuits against the state and Joseph Wambaugh, claiming defamation and conspiracy. However, both suits were eventually dismissed. On January 16, 1998, William Bradfield, who had been in prison for over a decade, was found unresponsive in his cell and pronounced dead due to cardiac arrest. Kenneth Reinert, the ex-husband of Susan Reinert, passed away in June 2002 without ever knowing what happened to their 2 missing children. J.C. Smith, whose conviction was overturned in 1992, wrote books about the case and remarried in 2002. He died on May 12, 2009, leaving many questions about his involvement in the 1978 disappearance of his daughter and son-in-law, Stephanie and Edward Huntsberger, still unanswered. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Diane Holik. Diane Tammy Holik was born in 1958 in New York City and was known to her friends and family as a hardworking and joyful person. Her work ethic led to financial stability and her successful career. For over 20 years, she worked at IBM, a leading global technology company. In 1996, she relocated to Austin, Texas, where she held a senior position that allowed her to work remotely from her home office. Diane purchased a luxurious home in the suburbs of Austin and lived a privileged life, often hosting wine tastings, dining at upscale restaurants, and frequenting dance clubs. She was also involved in charity work and made efforts to improve her personal life. However, her life took a turn in mid-November 2001 when a severe storm warning was issued for Texas, bringing heavy rain and tornadoes to the Austin area. As a result, Diane worked from home on the morning of November 16th, but suddenly became unresponsive during a scheduled work call. Diane had multiple phones, but she wasn't answering any of them. Her co-workers left messages asking her to call back, but when she didn't respond, they grew concerned. They contacted the police department and requested that someone check on Diane at her home. When the officers arrived, Diane's neighbor offered a spare key, allowing the police to enter the house. Inside, they found an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of dogs emerging from the kitchen. As the police searched the house, they found Diane's body in the bedroom on the second floor. The detectives were called to the scene, and they were struck by the unusual cleanliness of the crime scene. There were no signs of theft, struggle, or forced entry. Diane's body was fully dressed and lying next to her bed. The detectives quickly realized that they were dealing with a crime. The investigation revealed distinct strangulation marks on Diane's neck, likely caused by a rope or similar object. Her wrists also showed signs of being bound with cable ties. The cleanliness of the house, the lack of stolen valuables, and the absence of forced entry led the detectives to believe that Diane's killer was someone she knew and trusted. They suspected that the killer was someone she had let into her home voluntarily. An investigation into Diane's death revealed no signs of forced intimacy, but detectives did find suspicious dark spots and red stains on the carpet near the bedroom entrance. A towel on the back of the sofa in the living room caught their attention due to its mismatch with the otherwise clean and orderly surroundings, prompting them to send it to the laboratory for examination. Diane's acquaintances reported that she had no known enemies, and the police discovered that she was in a romantic relationship with Dennis Conley, a man she had plans to spend her life with. Diane had been married before, but that marriage ended quickly. She met Dennis through a dating service, and he had 2 children from a previous marriage. Dennis was a businessman living in Houston, 150 miles from Austin, where Diane resided. Despite the distance, Diane and Dennis formed a close bond, with Dennis proposing to her after 2 months with a valuable platinum ring. However, according to Diane's friends, the relationship began to decline recently. Diane had been feeling controlled by Dennis at times. Diane was also troubled by the decision to relocate to Houston, which meant leaving her home in the suburbs of Austin. She put her house up for sale, but realtors struggled to find a buyer willing to pay the asking price of $435,000. This led detectives to suspect that Dennis might be involved in Diane's death, prompting them to invite him to the police station for a conversation. Dennis agreed to speak with them without a lawyer. The medical examiner determined that Diane died sometime between 3 p.m. on November 15th and 3 a.m. on November 16th. Notably, the wedding ring Dennis had given her was missing from her finger, while her other jewelry remained untouched in the bedroom. This raised questions about the killer's motives and whether the ring was removed to mislead investigators. During the police interview, Dennis appeared to be a grieving man. He was asked about his relationship with Diane and his whereabouts on the day of her death and the day her body was found. Dennis claimed he was in Houston at the time. He stated that he last spoke with Diane on the morning of November 15th and spent the rest of the day at work without contacting her again. When he couldn't reach Diane the next morning, he left a message on her voicemail. The police took Dennis' fingerprints and DNA sample, but ultimately cleared him as a suspect after verifying his alibi. He had not left the city, so the detectives had to expand their search for a new lead. Further inquiry revealed that an unknown man had inspected Diane's house a few days before her death, claiming to be a potential buyer. He had planned to return with his wife to make a joint purchase decision. This clue became a top priority for the police, who began questioning the owners of properties for sale in the area, hoping that someone may have seen this mysterious buyer. Several women in the area reported that a suspicious man had visited their homes around the time of Diane's murder. He, described as being 35 to 45 years old with a large nose and dark hair, had arrived unaccompanied by a real estate agent. 6 of the women refused to let him in, but one allowed him to enter and view her home. She who let him in reported that he acted strangely, showing no interest in the layout of the house or its features. Instead, he specifically asked to see the bedroom on the second floor. When she became uncomfortable and asked him to leave, he introduced himself as Walter Miller. The police searched their databases for anyone matching the name Walter Miller, but the individuals they found did not match his age or appearance. A forensic artist created a sketch of the suspect based on the women's descriptions. Diane's killer removed the cable ties that had bound her hands, but the rationale behind this action is unclear. Did he know his victim personally? A subsequent autopsy revealed no evidence of forced intimacy or assault, yet the police remained vigilant, returning to the crime scene to search for potential traces of semen. However, these efforts yielded nothing. A police sketch of a potential suspect in the Diane Holik case was broadcast on the evening news, urging anyone who recognized the person to come forward. One of the few leads investigators had was a towel from Diane's house with a few short hairs on it. But the hairs were rootless, making it impossible to obtain a complete DNA sample. A woman contacted the police after seeing the sketch and reported a similar encounter. She and her husband had put their house up for sale 6 months prior, and a man had come to visit, claiming he wanted to buy the house for cash and needed to see it first. However, she refused to let him in, and he left. 2 months later, the same man returned to her doorstep and introduced himself as Jim Taylor. She was home alone with her young daughter, as her husband had just left for work. He asked to look around the house, but she denied his request again. This time, he became angry and aggressive, yelling and demanding to be let in. She immediately recalled the encounter and remembered writing down his name and the license plate number of his minivan. The police now had a crucial lead to investigate. A search of the vehicle's registration revealed that the owner was not Jim Taylor, but Patrick Anthony Russo. Initially, Russo seemed like an unlikely suspect. He was a married man with 2 children, lived 40 minutes outside of Austin, and was a member of a church music band. However, a deeper look into his past revealed a disturbing history of violent crimes against women. Russo had been convicted of a series of attacks, including one that involved abducting and attempting to strangle a victim with cable ties. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison but was released on parole after serving only 8 years. While in prison, he met his future wife, Janet, a church volunteer. The police found it hard to believe that Russo's connection to the case was mere coincidence. The police visited Anthony Russo's house with a search warrant, and he seemed unsurprised by their arrival. Although they found no evidence of Diane's belongings, including her ring, in his house or minivan, a neighbor reported seeing a similar vehicle at Diane's house on the day she died. In the utility room, investigators discovered cable ties identical to those that left marks on Diane's wrists. However, these ties are widely available at hardware stores. The police asked Anthony to come to the station for further questioning, where they inquired about his whereabouts on November 15th and 16th. Anthony claimed that on the 15th, he drove to Austin to visit a religious radio station but was unable to enter because no one answered the door. Notably, the radio station was near Diane's house. He stated that he left the station around 4 p.m. but got lost due to a hurricane, arriving home around 6 p.m. This alibi is questionable, as the forensic medical expert reported that Diane died between 3 p.m. and 3 a.m. Russo was questioned by the police about whether he was looking to buy a house. He claimed he had not inquired about any properties for buy, which would later prove to be an important statement. When shown a photo of Diane, Russo remained impassive and denied having met her. With no evidence connecting him to the crime, the police had no choice but to release him. However, when detectives investigated further by visiting a radio station Russo had mentioned, they discovered that his previous statement was a fabrication. The employees at a local business explained that they didn't lock the doors during a tornado warning because a large crowd had gathered in the lobby. Meanwhile, a woman who was selling her house contacted the police after encountering a man who resembled the suspect in a recent crime. She had been at home with her child when he came to her door, claiming to be interested in buying a house. He was holding a pamphlet with real estate listings, including her own home. She allowed him into her home, but when she showed him a bedroom, he attempted to attack her. However, he quickly fled when he heard her child crying in the next room. She retained the pamphlet, which was later given to the police. They found a clear fingerprint on the pamphlet, which belonged to Anthony Russo. Russo denied ever looking at houses for sale, but the fingerprint proved he had lied to the police. Russo's false statement was a misdemeanor, and since he was still on probation, it was a violation of his parole conditions. The police arrested him, fearing that he might flee while they searched for evidence linking him to the death of Diane. To ensure public safety, the authorities decided to keep Russo in custody. The police were able to locate 15 women who had showed homes to a man who matched Anthony Russo's description. All 15 women were asked to identify the suspect from a lineup of 5 men who were similarly dressed and had similar appearances. However, only 10 of the women were able to positively identify Russo as he who had visited them to view homes. The remaining 5 women were unable to make an identification. Despite this, the police still had reason to believe Russo was involved in the crime and brought him in for further questioning. During the interrogation, Russo continued to deny any involvement in the crime, but eventually stopped answering questions and requested to see his wife. Meanwhile, the police received the results of a DNA analysis from the laboratory. The results showed that a hair found on a towel at the victim's home matched Russo's DNA profile. While this was a significant piece of evidence, it was not conclusive, as there was a small chance that the hair could have belonged to someone else with the same DNA profile. Despite the accumulation of circumstantial evidence, the police still lacked a direct link between Russo and the victim's death. Investigation revealed 2 key pieces of evidence that implicated in Diane's death. Firstly, cell phone data placed Russo in the same area as Diane on the day she died. Secondly, a thorough examination of Russo's home computer uncovered a disturbing search history. Russo frequently visited an adult website where he consumed content explicitly depicting strangulation during intimate activities. Furthermore, the website required subscription, indicating that Russo actively sought out this material and was willing to pay for it. 2 days prior to Diane's death, Russo had accessed a particular story on the website that told the tale of a man who, under the guise of being a buyer, infiltrated a lonely woman's home, strangled her, and then stole valuables to make the crime appear as a robbery, thus disguising his true motive of satiating his desire for strangulation. Detectives delved into Russo's financial life and found he and his wife had a mere $2,000 in savings and were still making mortgage payments on their current home, clearly indicating he was in no position to buy a new house. Without concrete evidence, police arrested Russo and charged him with the murder of Diane Holik nearly 2.5 years after her death, which took place on November 15, 2001. In court, 14 women testifying under oath that Russo had approached them about viewing homes, often visiting them in person on the day of the murder. Notably, these women all matched a specific profile, suggesting Russo had been observing them beforehand. While most refused him entry, one woman allowed him in initially but soon asked him to leave due to his strange demeanor. Russo's interest in homes was not random, as he specifically sought out homes occupied by women of a particular age group. The prosecution presented evidence that Russo visited homes for sale, often targeting women who lived alone. Russo visited Diane's house again, likely at her invitation, but this time with a specific intention. He had planned his actions carefully to avoid leaving any evidence. On a rainy day, Diane offered him a towel to dry off, which he casually discarded on the back of the sofa. As she showed him around the house, Russo attacked her on the second floor. Prosecutors believed that Russo derived pleasure from the act of strangulation, which ultimately led to Diane's death. Before leaving the scene, Russo took cable ties and Diane's wedding ring, which were never found by the police. He used a spare key hidden at the front door to lock up behind him. This was the prosecution's version of events. At the trial, Russo's current and former wives testified that he had a history of enjoying the act of strangulation. It's worth noting that Russo had a prior conviction for a similar crime. After deliberating for 11 hours, the jury found Patrick Anthony Russo guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison, but never admitted to his guilt, despite his history of similar crimes. Russo will become eligible for parole again and can submit his initial petition in 2044. At that point, he will be approximately 80 years old. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Amanda Plass. Amanda Lynn Plass was born on December 11, 1990, in Choppy, Massachusetts, where she grew up with her sister Emily and brother Nicholas. Her mother, Michelle Myers, described Amanda as a free-spirited individual who often seemed out of place in the present time. In 2011, Amanda was working as a waitress at a local restaurant in Choppy and was in a relationship with a 27-year-old carpenter named Seth Green. Tragedy struck on August 26, 2011. Seth called 911 and reported that he had found Amanda lying unresponsive in the kitchen of her apartment. When police and paramedics arrived, they found that Amanda was already deceased from multiple stab wounds to her chest, throat, and abdomen. The scene was immediately cordoned off and investigations were initiated. Seth was found sitting on the porch, visibly distressed and emotional. Detectives carefully searched Amanda's apartment for evidence, but the perpetrator had managed to escape the scene. The investigation was ongoing, with the goal of identifying the person responsible for Amanda's murder and bringing them to justice. Detectives began their investigation at the crime scene, where they found a significant amount of blood splatter in the kitchen, indicating that this was where the attack occurred. The evidence suggested that a knife was the likely murder weapon, and it was taken by the perpetrator. Further analysis revealed visible shoe prints from Nike sneakers on the floor and broken window glass, bearing a palm print in one of the rooms. Given the type and number of wounds on Amanda's body, detectives suspected that the perpetrator was someone Amanda knew, and the motive was likely a personal vendetta. As a result, they brought Amanda's boyfriend, Seth Green, in for questioning at the police station. When Seth arrived at the police station, he appeared visibly shaken, overcome with emotion over the loss of his girlfriend. The investigators were interested in determining his emotional response. During the interrogation, Seth explained that he had spent the entire day at work and had planned to give Amanda a ride to her workplace, but was unable to do so due to his own work schedule. Seth had a limited relationship with Amanda, but he loved her and had no motive to harm her. As a carpenter, Seth used various tools at work, including a knife on his tool belt. However, he consistently left his tools at work after his shift, and this day was no exception. After finishing his work, Seth changed his clothes, left his tools behind, and went to meet Amanda. He understood why he was the main suspect, but he denied any involvement in her death. The police investigation confirmed Seth's alibi, and he passed a polygraph test. Additionally, the boots he was wearing when the police arrived didn't match the Nike sneakers found at the crime scene, further ruling out his involvement. Amanda's tragic death led to a complex investigation. Initially, the police explored the possibility that her ex-boyfriend was involved, but further inquiry ruled him out as a suspect. He provided a DNA sample and fingerprints, which did not match the evidence found at the crime scene. Moreover, he had a solid alibi, eliminating him from the list of potential perpetrators. The family's pain deepened when they found out that some police officers had taken photos of Amanda's body while the state police were on their way to the crime scene. These officers shared the disturbing images with other officers and civilians, breaking the family's trust with the authorities and adding to their emotional pain. The case remained stagnant for approximately 2 years until investigators decided to review the evidence again. During this review, a crucial clue was discovered on a dry erase board in Amanda's bedroom. The message, "Dennis was here 8/11, had gone unnoticed until then. Considering the date, this message became significant. It was just 15 days before Amanda's body was discovered in her apartment. The revelation sparked questions. Who was Dennis, and was he connected to Amanda's death? The police had not come across this name throughout the entire investigation. Detectives analyzed Amanda's phone records and social media posts to see if she had any connections to someone named Dennis. Amanda's ex-boyfriend reported to the police that her apartment had been broken into several times when she was not home. Amanda suspected a young man whose name started with the letter D. She knew this man and wanted to resolve the issue peacefully, so she decided to talk to him first. During their meeting, Amanda tried to discuss the break-ins, but the man denied any involvement. When Amanda mentioned that a neighbor had seen him in her apartment, she politely asked him to return her stolen belongings. However, the man left. The investigation then focused on identifying the man named Dennis, who was suspected of being involved in Amanda's death. The police found a man named Dennis Rosa Roman living 3 blocks from the scene of the crime. A background check revealed that Dennis had a history of breaking and entering. Although there was no palm print to match the one found at Amanda's home, the police still wanted to question Dennis. They located him in Westfield, Massachusetts, and invited him to the station for an informal conversation. However, Dennis declined the invitation. But in November 2013, Dennis voluntarily visited the police station. The police questioned Dennis about his relationship with Amanda, and he acknowledged knowing her from Chappie, but claimed he hadn't seen her in a couple of years, which was true since Amanda had been deceased for a couple of years. When asked if he had ever visited Amanda's apartment, Dennis denied ever being there and stated that he didn't know her well. He admitted to occasionally selling weed to Amanda, which was how they occasionally interacted. During the interrogation, Dennis agreed to provide a DNA swab and revealed the size of his shoes, which matched the one found at the crime scene. However, the police noted that Dennis's Nike Air Max shoes had a different tread pattern than the ones that left bloody tracks at the crime scene. After providing his DNA, Dennis refused to answer further questions, promising to return to the police station in a few days to continue the conversation. Initially, the police didn't have sufficient grounds to arrest Dennison, so he was released. This decision was made despite concerns that he might flee and hinder the investigation. Further investigation revealed that Amanda and Dennis had made several phone calls to each other on July 28, 2011. The phone records showed that Amanda initiated 4 calls, while Dennis initiated 5 calls. When Dennis returned to the police station a few days later, his story changed. He now claimed that he had communicated with Amanda about break-ins at her apartment when she wasn't home. Amanda didn't report the incidents because nothing of value was stolen. The investigators found this story unconvincing, particularly since they had heard about the alleged break-ins multiple times before. Their suspicions grew, and they strongly suspected that Dennis was actually the person responsible for breaking into Amanda's apartment. As Rosa Roman continued to alter his initial statement, the investigators became more confident that he was hiding something crucial to the case. The priority shifted to uncovering the truth about his involvement in Amanda's death and determining what secrets he was trying to conceal. When investigators showed Dennis a photo of a dry erase board with the message, "Dennis was here," on August 11, 2011, he initially admitted to writing it, contradicting his previous statement that he had never entered Amanda's apartment. This admission was significant, as it directly implicated him in the crime. Furthermore, DNA results confirmed that Dennis had given false testimony, as his DNA matched the DNA found under Amanda's fingernails, and his palm print was found on a glass at the crime scene. After realizing that the police had gathered sufficient evidence for his arrest, Dennis changed his story for the third time. He now claimed that he had been present at the crime scene and had attempted to save Amanda from the attacker. However, he refused to name the alleged attacker, citing concerns for his and his family's safety. Instead, he provided a detailed description of the person he claimed was responsible for Amanda's death. Dennis described the alleged attacker as a tall, white, light-skinned individual with blue eyes, weighing between 170 and 200 pounds. He also claimed that the person was wearing old pants, dirty boots, and a t-shirt with the phrase, "Why drink and drive when you can smoke and fly?" Despite this new information, detectives did not believe Dennis's story, as all the evidence pointed to him as the sole perpetrator of the crime. As a result, Dennis was arrested and charged with Amanda's murder. The trial took place almost 3 years after Amanda's death, and centered around the debate over whether Dennis was responsible for her murder. His lawyers presented the argument that although Dennis was at the crime scene, he did not commit the murder. Instead, they accused the police of botching the investigation and framing Dennis after their efforts to find the perpetrator failed. Dennis claimed that his involvement in Amanda's death was involuntary. He stated that his dealer forced him to collect a debt at her apartment. Dennis allegedly tried to help Amanda, but couldn't stop the dealer. He cited his DNA under her nails as evidence, saying she grabbed his hand during the incident. In contrast, the prosecutors had a different explanation for the events leading to Amanda's death. They believed that Dennis was breaking into Amanda's apartment while she was not home and that she had caught him. During one of these break-ins, Dennis allegedly left an inscription with his name on a board. Amanda assumed that Dennis was the trespasser who had stolen from her, and that is why she called him and asked him to return the stolen items. This explained the multiple phone calls between Amanda and Dennis on the day she died. Dennis, the killer of Amanda, mistakenly believed Amanda was already at work, re-entered her apartment, and ultimately took her life in a fit of anger during a dispute. A jury convicted Dennis of the crime after 8 days of testimony and 5 hours of deliberation. Dennis received a life sentence in prison with no possibility of parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Danielle Jennings. Danielle Jennings was born on September 16, 1978, in Columbia, South Carolina, USA. She spent her childhood in Stockton, Georgia, with her mother and stepfather. Despite her cheerful and outgoing personality, Danielle faced a challenging situation when she became pregnant at the age of 16. However, she was determined to be a good mother and had no doubts about having her child. After the breakup with Carl, the father of her child, Danielle gave birth to her son, Tristan, in 1996. At just 17 years old, she became a single mother. Despite the challenges, Danielle was determined to provide the best life for herself and her son. She eventually met Luis, a man who would become a father figure to Tristan. Danielle and Luis had known each other since they were teenagers and had been friends in the past. When they started dating, Danielle was happy to have found someone who could support her and her son. Luis took care of Danielle and Tristan, and she felt like her life was finally falling into place. They moved in together, and Danielle found a job at a landscaping company. She was proud of herself for taking this step and was glad to have found a sense of stability and security. In December 1998, Luis proposed to Danielle, and she happily accepted. At the time, Danielle's life was on the upswing. She had a wonderful son, was engaged to the man she loved, and had promising career prospects. However, her life was about to take a devastating turn. On March 15, 1999, Luis came home from work to find Danielle lifeless on their bed. Their son, Tristan, was at daycare that day. Luis immediately knew something was wrong based on the color of Danielle's skin. He called 911, and police arrived at their apartment in Norcross, Georgia. The initial information was that a woman had died and her fiancé had made the 911 call. This raised suspicions among investigators, as it is not uncommon for the partner to be involved in the death of their loved one. Luis reported the crime to the police at the apartment entrance, stating that the victim was 20-year-old Danielle Jennings. According to Luis, he found Danielle's body when he returned from work. She was lying face down on the bed, and when he turned her over, he discovered that she was dead. Luis immediately called 911. The police took Luis to the station for questioning, and investigators examined the crime scene. Danielle was lying on her back on the bed, fully dressed, with a ligature around her neck. The ligature was a stocking tied very tightly, indicating that the perpetrator left her no chance of survival. The stocking was tied at the back of Danielle's neck, suggesting that the perpetrator was behind her when she was strangled. The bed was disheveled, and one of the dresser drawers was open, possibly indicating that the perpetrator took the stocking from her drawer. Additionally, Danielle's purse had been rummaged through, with its contents dumped out. The police considered the possibility that the crime was a robbery that escalated into murder, but noted that valuable items such as cameras and jewelry remained untouched. The investigators considered the possibility that the perpetrator's goal was to steal from the apartment, but after encountering Danielle, decided to kill her to eliminate her as a witness. They also explored the possibility that the crime scene was staged, as the front door showed no signs of forced entry. After searching the surrounding area, they found no evidence. The sliding glass door leading to the backyard was locked and showed no signs of forced entry. Based on their findings, the investigators concluded that Danielle must have let the perpetrator involuntarily, or that the perpetrator had a key to the apartment. This led them to focus on Luis, Danielle's fiancé, as the main suspect during their questioning. Luis was very emotional about the situation, as romantic relationships can sometimes lead to intense anger and sad consequences. The interrogation began with questions about his whereabouts on the day of his fiancé's death. According to Luis, he spent the entire day at work, and the last time he saw Danielle was Danielle was when he left for work in the morning. They both left the apartment at 6:45 a.m., but Danielle returned to get something. Luis claimed that Danielle was worried about an important meeting with management that day and seemed a little distracted. He also mentioned that Danielle called him at 11:30 a.m. to ask if he wanted to go to lunch with her, but he refused because he had a lot of work to do. Luis tried to contact Danielle later that day, but she wasn't answering. He called her colleagues and learned that she had gone out for lunch but never returned. When he tried to call their home phone, Danielle didn't answer. This led him to leave work and check on her. When he arrived at their apartment, he noticed that the front door was unlocked, and he found a jar that made him nervous. During the investigation, Luis stated that they had a good relationship and were deeply in love. Luis expressed that he was depressed and felt that the police were wasting their time by interrogating him, as he believed the real culprit was still at large. Detectives interviewed Danielle's friends and family, who all confirmed that Luis could not harm Danielle, as they were planning a wedding and were in love. Luis's co-workers also confirmed that he was at work all day, which ruled out any possibility of his involvement in the crime. Luis mentioned that Danielle had been receiving excessive attention from her co-worker, Jeff, who made her uncomfortable. Investigators went to Danielle's workplace and spoke to her boss, who confirmed that Danielle had complained about Jeff's behavior. Jeff's behavior was making Danielle uncomfortable. He was touching her and interfering with her work. Danielle had made it clear that she was in a committed relationship with Luis. Despite this, Jeff continued to make Danielle feel uncomfortable. The situation was also complicated by the fact that Jeff was 40 years old, while Danielle was just 20. Danielle's co-workers reported that she left the office for lunch, but never returned, providing investigators with a timeline for when the attack occurred. This raised suspicions about Jeff, who was absent from the office during the same time frame. The investigation explored the possibility that Jeff may have attacked Danielle after she opened the front door to her home. This could explain why there were no signs of forced entry. Jeff was brought in for questioning to discuss his relationship with Danielle. During the questioning, Jeff acknowledged inviting Danielle to lunch, but denied any involvement in Danielle's death. He did admit to liking Danielle, but stated that he didn't engage in any inappropriate behavior that would justify her complaint against him. Jeff claimed that he couldn't have attacked Danielle because he had an alibi. According to Jeff, he was with another colleague all day, working on various issues and driving around the city together. This meant that it was impossible for him to have committed the crime. Jeff identified a co-worker who he claimed was with him at the time of the crime. Investigators met with this co-worker, who confirmed Jeff's alibi, thus ruling out Jeff from suspect. The autopsy report provided some insight into the circumstances of Danielle's death. The cause of death was asphyxia, indicating that Danielle was attacked by surprise. Investigators concluded that the perpetrator approached her from behind and tightened the stocking until she lost consciousness. The perpetrator then tied the stocking in a knot to prevent Danielle from regaining consciousness. The lack of defensive injuries on her body suggested that Danielle did not resist the attack. In fact, the only injury on her body was the ligature mark on her neck, indicating that she may not have even seen the face of her attacker. The police investigation at the crime scene did not yield any evidence that could help identify the perpetrator. Despite a thorough search, no shoe prints, DNA, fingerprints, or hair were found. As a result, there was no evidence to send to the laboratory for analysis. Without any new leads, the police returned to their initial theory that the crime was a robbery gone wrong. The police asked Luis to re-examine the apartment with them to see if he could notice anything unusual. After a thorough examination, Luis reported that nothing seemed to be missing from the apartment and all items were in their usual places. However, a few days later, Luis contacted the police to report that he could not find Danielle's wedding ring. Luis also pointed out another unusual detail to the investigators. The stocking used to strangle Danielle did not belong to her. According to Luis, Danielle did not wear stockings, which suggested that the perpetrator had brought the stocking with them. One of her friends mentioned her ex-boyfriend Eddie, whom she started dating while pregnant. Eddie was known for his violent behavior, and as the relationship progressed, he became increasingly controlling and domineering. He eventually forbade her to see her friends and family. The relationship with Eddie continued to deteriorate after Danielle gave birth to her son. Things took a turn for the worse when Eddie started using illegal substances, and Danielle decided to end the relationship. Danielle attempted to start anew after leaving Eddie, but he refused to accept the end of their relationship. His behavior became increasingly unpredictable, prompting Danielle to obtain a restraining order against him. However, Eddie repeatedly disregarded the order. Eddie's actions escalated, with him frequently calling Danielle, parking near her home, and even appearing at her workplace. Danielle's family reported that Eddie had made numerous calls to her in the months leading up to her death, demanding that she meet with him, but she consistently hung up on him. Detectives identified Eddie as a prime suspect and brought him in for questioning. He was hostile and resistant to cooperating with the police. When discussing Danielle, his demeanor became visibly agitated. During the interrogation, Eddie's account of his relationship with Danielle contradicted the statements made by her family members. He claimed to have never been violent towards her and denied any involvement in her death, stating that he had not spoken to her in over a year. The investigators suspected that Eddie was lying to them. To verify his alibi, they checked Danielle's phone call history and discovered that Eddie had been in contact with her in the months leading up to her death. The police needed to confirm Eddie's whereabouts at the time of the attack. Eddie claimed to have been working out of state as a tow truck driver at the time of Danielle's death. He stated that he was miles away from the Ashley Lakes apartments where Danielle lived. His employer corroborated Eddie's story, providing receipts from a motel and gas stations that suggested Eddie was indeed out of state. However, 3 days after Danielle's death, the police received a new lead that changed the direction of the investigation. During an interview with residents of Ashley Lakes apartments, a woman shared a disturbing incident that had occurred a week before Danielle's death. She reported that she had been awoken by a knock on her door, but when she looked through the peephole, no one was there. She returned to bed, but a minute later, she heard her front door slam shut. She reported an incident where a maintenance man entered her apartment without permission. She stated that he was looking at her rather than performing his job, which made her feel uncomfortable. This incident led to an investigation, and the woman provided a description of the man to the police. Further investigation revealed that another woman had reported a similar incident, where a man entered her apartment claiming to need to change light bulbs, despite her apartment not needing any new bulbs. The man made a statement suggesting that he might be in the wrong apartment and then left. The management of Ashley Lakes Apartments provided investigators with a list of maintenance specialists working at the complex, and only one matched the description given by the two women. This individual was identified as Calvin Oliver, a 42-year-old maintenance worker who started working at the complex in September 1998. When shown his photo, both women identified Oliver as the man who entered their apartments without permission. The investigation also revealed that Oliver had been working at the complex when a string of incidents involving stolen items occurred, including missing cash, checks, jewelry, and computers. As the investigation continued, detectives searched for potential connections between Calvin Oliver and Danielle Jennings. They discovered that Oliver had performed work in Jennings' apartment just a couple of weeks before her death. This revelation made Oliver a key person of interest in the investigation. Oliver likely knew that Danielle and her fiancé Luis would be at work during the day, allowing him to enter their apartment without raising suspicion using his master key. It's possible that Danielle returned home for lunch while Oliver was already inside. Calvin Oliver was brought in for questioning by investigators. Initially, they asked him about the thefts that some Ashley Lakes Apartments residents had reported. He denied any involvement. When questioned about Danielle Jennings, Oliver claimed he had heard about what happened to her but didn't know her personally. He admitted to doing work in her apartment, but the police lacked concrete evidence linking him to the crime. Just before releasing Oliver from the police station, investigators decided to run a database check on him. The results were shocking. Oliver had an outstanding warrant in another jurisdiction for failing to appear on a burglary charge related to the theft of personal checks. Oliver had a significant criminal history, with convictions dating back to 1974. including residential burglaries, armed robbery, and sexual assault. He spent most of his life in prison, which raises the question of how he was able to get a job at Ashley Lake's apartments. This is relevant because if Oliver was in Danielle's apartment when she came in, he had a motive to hurt her to avoid going back to prison. The police detained Oliver due to an active warrant for his arrest, which gave them time to investigate his involvement in Danielle's death. As part of their investigation into the thefts at Ashley Lake's apartments, the police obtained a search warrant for Oliver's apartment. There, they found stolen belongings from other residents, as well as Danielle's wedding ring, which linked Oliver to her death. 9 days after Danielle's death, Calvin Oliver was charged with first-degree felony and burglary. After his false statement was exposed, Oliver refused to answer any more questions and chose to remain silent. During the trial, the prosecution presented a different scenario. Oliver killed Danielle after she caught him stealing at her apartment on March 14th, as she unexpectedly returned home from work. The trial lasted 5 days, and the jury delivered a guilty verdict on October 13, 2000. The court sentenced Oliver to life in prison for the murder of Danielle Jennings and an additional 20 years for stealing her wedding ring. As a result, Danielle's mother and stepfather, Sherry and Philip Jennings, gained custody of her son, Tristan. Ashley Lake's Apartments was aware of Oliver's troubled past, but failed to conduct a background check on him. This lack of oversight allowed Oliver, who had spent most of his life in prison, to reside in the same apartment complex as Danielle. Danielle's family sued Ashley Lake's Apartments after a series of thefts, and the murder went unreported by management. They claimed negligent hiring, inadequate security, and death. The jury returned a verdict of over $13 million, plus $2.5 million in punitive damages initially, later reduced to $250,000. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Autumn Tagert. Autumn Tagert was a single mother living in Windsor, a city on the border between Michigan, USA, and Ontario, Canada. In 2018, Autumn and her 9-year-old son Gavin spent a Saturday with Gavin's father, Chris, from whom Autumn had amicably separated. They all went grocery shopping together, and later Chris dropped them off at their third-floor apartment. That evening, Chris left for his own home, and Gavin spent quality time with his mother, playing video games before bed. As he drifted off to sleep, he was awoken by a strange noise. Opening his eyes, he was startled to see an unknown man standing in his room. The man instructed Gavin to close his eyes and go back to sleep before disappearing into the hallway. Gavin's room was adjacent to his mother's, which was on the right-hand side of his room. Approximately a minute after the stranger left his room, Gavin heard his mother's scream. Overcome with fear, Gavin had never felt such terror before. The screaming eventually stopped, and an eerie silence fell over the apartment. Exhausted and shaken, Gavin eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, Gavin woke up and immediately went to his mother's room. Everything in the apartment was smashed and destroyed. Gavin found his mother lying on the bed. At first, he thought she was asleep, but when he saw the blood on her nose, he realized she was dead. This discovery shocked him. Gavin couldn't contain his emotions. He broke down in tears and decided to seek help. He entered his mother's room, took her phone, and messaged his father, Chris, via the Messenger app. Gavin sent a message saying that Autumn wouldn't wake up. Chris and his girlfriend immediately drove to Autumn and Gavin's home. Upon arrival, Chris got out of the car and saw his son standing behind a glass door on the third floor. Since Chris didn't have an electronic key to enter the building, Gavin went downstairs to let him in. Chris asked Gavin to stay with his girlfriend while he checked on Autumn. When Chris entered the apartment and then the bedroom, he was met with a devastating sight. Autumn was lying pale and still. Autumn's body showed signs of severe trauma, with bruises on her face and body and a bloody nose. He immediately called 911 and police and paramedics arrived at the scene. Unfortunately, the paramedics were unable to save her and she was pronounced dead. The police investigation began, and experts searched the apartment for evidence. A child specialist interviewed Gavin, who reported that a man had told him to go to sleep the night before. Gavin said he heard his mother screaming, but the screams stopped after a while. He described the man he saw in his room as a white male of average height with messy hair, who appeared disheveled, as if he had just gotten out of bed. Gavin estimated the man was slender, but not extremely thin. The autopsy revealed that Autumn's death was caused by strangulation, and forensic experts found evidence that she had been physically assaulted before her death. Additionally, the examination showed injuries in her genital area and the presence of male DNA on her body. Initially, the police considered the possibility that the killer was one of the building's tenants. However, Gavin reported that the man he saw on the night of the crime was not a familiar face. Furthermore, the investigation showed that the perpetrator not only needed an electronic key to enter the building, but also to enter Autumn's apartment. Yet, there were no signs of forced entry on the door to her apartment. The police initially considered two possibilities: that Autumn had let the perpetrator in herself, or that she had left the door unlocked. However, they soon discovered evidence that suggested the perpetrator had actually climbed to the third floor. The perpetrator first accessed the second-floor balcony and then climbed up to the third floor, where the door was open, allowing them to enter the apartment without difficulty. On the night of the crime, a witness reported seeing a new black SUV, possibly a Honda Pilot, in the parking lot next to the building. The SUV was there until around 6 a.m. Detectives suspected that the owner of the SUV might be connected to the victim's death. They believed that the perpetrator may have used the SUV as a stepping stone to climb into the building, and then used the decorative protrusions on the building's corners as a makeshift ladder to climb from the second floor to the third floor. The crime occurred at night, which made it easier for investigators to analyze mobile phone activity in the area where Autumn lived. One of the active phone numbers belonged to Autumn's neighbor, Michelle, who lived in the same building. During the initial police interview, Michelle claimed she didn't know anything about the crime. However, phone records showed that she had been on the move around the city, making calls from different locations, and had turned off her phone around the time of the murder. Although the exact location of Michelle's phone couldn't be pinpointed due to some margin of error, it was clear that she was either in or near her apartment at the time of the crime. The detectives suspected that Michelle was hiding something and decided to question her again. During the second interview, Michelle continued to deny any knowledge of the crime. However, the police warned her that withholding information could make her an accomplice to the crime. Faced with this possibility, Michelle began to open up. She revealed that a man named Jay had contacted her boyfriend and her around 2 a.m. on the night of the crime. Jay wanted to purchase an illicit substance and also hire an escort. To begin, Jay, Michelle, and her boyfriend went to an ATM, where Jay withdrew cash. Michelle and her boyfriend then provided Jay with a portion of the substance, which Michelle admitted they were selling themselves. Later, Jay asked to buy more of the substance. Michelle instructed Jay to drive to the parking lot near her building, where she and her boyfriend planned to rob him. Upon arrival, the three of them used the substance together. Afterwards, Michelle and her boyfriend decided to flee. Before escaping, Michelle hid a bag of the banned substance in her genital area. This detail will become important later. Michelle reported that she and her boyfriend fled the scene, taking both the banned substance and a portion of Jay's money with them. They ran to the building's entrance and then proceeded to her apartment, where they locked themselves in, remained quiet, and kept the lights off. Jay was unable to enter the building because he didn't have an electronic key. From Michelle's apartment window, they observed shoe marks on the roof of Jay's car. The man left the scene around 6 a.m. Investigators believe that Jay attempted to enter the building to find the individuals who had stolen from him. However, since Jay didn't know Michelle's address, it's likely that he mistakenly entered Autumn's apartment instead. The police now had the suspect's phone number and photo, which were obtained from security cameras at the bank where he withdrew cash to purchase the banned substance, as well as from an ATM camera. After investigating the phone number, authorities discovered that the individual's name was not Jay, but rather Jitesh Bogle, a 27-year-old Canadian citizen who worked as a car development engineer in Warren, Michigan. He owned a black Honda Pilot SUV and frequently visited Canada, crossing the border via bridge or tunnel to get to Windsor. Authorities tracked his movements and found that he had left Canada on the morning of June 10th, the day Autumn died, and had not returned to the country since. When the police released information about the black SUV seen at the victim's house, Jitesh sold his car, which raised suspicions. The Canadian police contacted their American counterparts and learned that Jitesh was planning to move from Michigan to Washington State, where his parents lived in Kent. This decision to give up his job and move back to his parents' house, get rid of his car, and stop visiting Canada was highly suspicious. However, the police needed concrete evidence to arrest and extradite him to Canada. The Windsor police requested assistance from the U.S. National Security Agency to aid in the investigation and track the suspect's movements. To confirm that the male DNA found on Autumn's body belonged to Jitesh, they needed to obtain a sample of his DNA for comparison. U.S. agents monitored Jitesh's activities, aware that he was planning to move to Washington State and potentially flee to a third country. Jitesh attempted to alter his appearance by shaving off his beard and wearing blue contact lenses. But Jitesh was not cautious enough. During a visit to a bar in Warren, he left behind a glass after finishing his drink. Agents seized the glass, which provided them with a DNA sample. Although the comparison process took time, the result was not unexpected. The DNA sample from the glass matched the male DNA found on Autumn's body, confirming that it belonged to Jitesh Bogle. On August 17, 2018, more than 2 months after Autumn's death, Jitesh was arrested at his parents' home in Kent, Washington. The Canadian police charged him with the murder of Autumn Tagert. Due to restrictions in the country, the trial was postponed for a significant period of time and eventually began in November 2021. To maintain social distancing, the trial was held in 3 separate courtrooms. The main courtroom contained the judge, prosecutor, jury, and the defendant, along with his defense team. The 3 other courtrooms had large screens broadcasting the trial so that Autumn's relatives and others could watch. Jitesh Bogle entered a not guilty plea for the crime of taking Autumn's life, saying it was an accident. He explained that some dealers had stolen money and an illegal substance from him, running out of his car after committing the crime. This upset him, so he got out of the vehicle to try to find them. Due to the large amount of alcohol and substances he had consumed, he did not remember much of what happened that night. Jitesh said he remembered climbing onto the balcony before entering the apartment where Autumn lived. When he entered her apartment, he saw her asleep in her bed, but he mistakenly thought she was Michelle, the person who had robbed him. When Autumn woke up and started screaming, Jitesh told her to be quiet, but she didn't stop. In an attempt to quiet her, Jitesh covered her mouth, which ultimately caused her to suffocate. Jitesh said that when the screaming stopped, he realized what had happened and tried to revive Autumn by performing CPR, but unfortunately, it didn't work. Jitesh did not recall how Autumn's genital injuries occurred or how he left her apartment. His lawyers asked the prosecution to drop the first-degree murder charges, arguing that the crime was not premeditated. They believed that Jitesh was not in control of his actions due to the large amount of substances he had consumed. The fact that he placed his hand over her mouth was more consistent with an attempt to silence her than with an intent to kill. Bogle's defense team argued that he was not responsible for the death of Autumn Tagert because he was intoxicated and did not have the capacity to form intent or understand the consequences of his actions. They stated that his behavior was the result of intoxication and that he did not intentionally cause the death. The defense team questioned the reliability of the DNA evidence, suggesting that it could have been contaminated by John Lorda, a forensic expert who worked on the case. They argued that Lorda's actions, including rotating the body on the bed sheet, could have transferred DNA or fluids from the body to the sheet or vice versa, resulting in cross-contamination. Lort testified during cross-examination that he followed proper procedures to prevent cross-contamination of evidence. He changed gloves between handling each piece of evidence and taking photographs. Lort's examination of evidence in Tagert's room included a search for fluids such as urine, saliva, and semen, as these are common indicators of sexual assault in cases involving a deceased female victim. The prosecutor disagreed with the defendant's version of events. The prosecutor pointed out that the defendant had previously searched for substances in the same area of Autumn's body where Michelle had hidden them, which suggested that the defendant was aware of the substances and had intentionally committed sexual assault. The prosecutor stated that the defendant's actions were disgusting and constituted sexual assault. Jitesh Bogle disagreed with the prosecutor's assessment. When asked why he didn't call for emergency services when Autumn stopped breathing, Bogle explained that he was afraid of being arrested because he didn't think anyone would believe him. Bogle admitted that he didn't remember much of what happened in Autumn's room, but he did recall performing CPR on her after she stopped screaming. Gavin, Autumn's 13-year-old son, also took the stand during the trial. To make the experience less intimidating, he testified from a separate room in the courthouse, accompanied by a support worker. From this room, he shared his account of the events that occurred that night. On December 1, 2021, a 12-person jury delivered a guilty verdict to Jitesh Bogle for first-degree murder. The jury did not find sufficient evidence to prove that Bogle had intercourse with the victim, Autumn. Autumn's father, John Tagert, expressed relief and satisfaction with the verdict, stating that it was the right outcome for Autumn and her son, and that the family had finally received justice. On January 5, 2022, the court sentenced Jitesh Bogle to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years to be served before he can apply for parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Lauren Burke. Lauren Ashley Burke was born on December 30, 1989 in Marietta, Georgia, to James Burke and Vivian Gershon, who later divorced. She had two siblings, Jacqueline and Chad Burke. After high school, Lauren attended Auburn University, where she studied graphic design and was an active member of the Delta Gamma sorority. She also played lacrosse and was involved in various campus activities. Her friends described her as a friendly, excellent student who was always smiling, happy, and helpful. Lauren started dating Sean McQuaid while still in high school, and they continued their relationship when they both enrolled at Auburn University. At that time, education was their top priority, but they still made plans for their future together. Tragically, on March 4, 2008, she began the day by having breakfast with Sean at a cafe at 11 a.m. She then attended class and called her father, James, to discuss plans for spring break and a dentist appointment. After finishing her conversation with her father, Lauren visited her friend Sean in his dorm room, where she stayed until the evening. At 8:30 p.m., she had a planned study session with her classmate Michael at the library. When Lauren left Sean's room around 8 p.m., it was already dark outside. She got into her car, a black 2001 Honda Civic, which was parked in the lot next to the dorm. This was the last time Sean saw her. Michael waited for Lauren at the library, but she didn't show up. He started calling her cell phone, but she didn't answer. He kept calling and eventually got through to her. Lauren told him she had forgotten about their appointment and hung up. About an hour later, at 9 p.m., a 911 call was made, reporting an injured girl lying on the roadside, near the Farmville Baptist Church and Route 280 on the 147 freeway. Lauren was lying in the middle of the road, taking slow, deep breaths because she was suffocating. She had many injuries on her body and was only wearing socks on her feet. The traffic in both directions was blocked because drivers had stopped their cars in the roadway to help her. At 9:12 p.m., the police arrived, but Lauren was already unconscious. A few minutes later, paramedics came and found that Lauren's pulse was very weak as they loaded her into the ambulance. She was taken to East Alabama Medical Center at 9:35 p.m., where doctors started trying to save her life. Around the same time, at 9:27 p.m., multiple people called 911 to report a car on fire on the Auburn University campus. Firefighters and police were sent to the scene, but they couldn't find the owner of the burning car among the students who had come out of their dorms to see the fire. When the police checked the license plate, they found out that the car belonged to James Burke, a resident of Georgia. But what they didn't know was that James Burke is Lauren's father. The police called James and learned that the burned-out Honda actually belonged to his daughter Lauren, who is a student at Auburn University. James was frantic to know what was happening with his daughter, but the police couldn't give him any information. They didn't know where Lauren was and claimed no one was in the burned-out car. James tried calling Lauren's cell phone, but she didn't answer, which only made him more anxious. Desperate for news, James reached out to his daughter's friends, but none of them knew anything about her whereabouts or the car fire. He then contacted his ex-wife, Vivian, Lauren's mother, hoping she might know something, but she was also in the dark. Vivian called Lauren's boyfriend, Sean, at 9:40 p.m. to inform him that Lauren was missing and her car had been burned. Sean started making calls to their mutual friends to see if anyone had seen Lauren that evening. He discovered that she had canceled a library meeting, claiming she had forgotten about it. Sean was certain that Lauren hadn't forgotten her evening appointment because she had told him she was heading to the library when she left his room 2 hours earlier. Meanwhile, Lauren's family and friends were searching for her, unaware of the desperate situation unfolding at East Alabama Medical Center, where doctors were fighting to save her life. Lauren was brought to the hospital unconscious and without identification, so the doctors didn't know who she was. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to save her, and she was pronounced dead about an hour after admission. The autopsy revealed that she had died from a single bullet wound that had punctured both lungs. The shot had been fired from very close range, with the gun muzzle just inches from her skin. As police investigated the burned-out car on campus, whose owner was missing, they quickly pieced together the evidence and realized that the hospital's unidentified victim was Lauren Burke. On March 5, 2008, James Burke identified his daughter Lauren's body after traveling from Atlanta. The news of her death quickly spread throughout the Auburn University campus. As Lauren's loved ones mourned her loss, the police worked to uncover the circumstances surrounding her death, including the connection between her murder and the car fire. They also sought to determine whether other students were at risk. Investigators processed both the scene where Lauren's body was found and the area around her car for evidence. Auburn Police Captain Tom Stauffer stated that the department has dedicated all available resources to finding the person responsible for the crime, as the tight-knit student community of Auburn, Alabama takes such incidents very seriously. The police are deeply invested in solving the case and will not rest until the perpetrator is caught. To aid in the investigation, Alabama Governor Bob Riley has offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to an arrest. The burned-out car belonging to Lauren Burks was brought to the Auburn Police Department, where state forensic laboratory investigators and state fire chief's office officers examined the charred remains. Their search uncovered burned clothing fragments, a melted digital camera, and the car's owner's manual. A significant discovery was a .38 caliber bullet found under the front seat, suggesting that the car's interior may have been the crime scene and that the perpetrator had set the fire to destroy evidence. Investigations involved interviews with Lauren's family, friends, and boyfriend, but none could identify a suspect who had a motive to harm her. Prior to her death, Lauren had been at a Sean's dorm, so detectives searched his room but found nothing linking him to the crime. After talking to Michael, the person Lauren was supposed to meet at the library, detectives discovered that when Lauren answered his call, he heard a sound similar to a moving car in the background. This new information led them to investigate further, and they found that Lauren's bank card had been used multiple times shortly after she was found lying in the road. It seemed likely that the person using Lauren's bank card was involved in her incident, so the police started searching for them. However, the case took an unexpected turn soon after. Just 2 days after Lauren's death, on March 7, 2008, at 9:55 a.m., a similar attack occurred at a Walmart parking lot in Newnan, Georgia, about 75 miles from Auburn. A 72-year-old woman was assaulted by a man of African descent as she was getting into her car. The attacker hit her on the head, threatened her, and forced her to move to the passenger seat. He then got into the driver's seat and tried to drive away, but realized an eyewitness was following him and calling for help. The perpetrator, fearing the police would be called, returned to the Walmart parking lot where they had initially been spotted. They abandoned the stolen vehicle, got into a nearby silver Chrysler Sebring, and sped away. Several hours later, 4 officers began a high-speed chase to catch the fleeing Chrysler as it headed towards Columbus, West Georgia. The driver of the Chrysler refused to stop, putting other drivers at risk during the pursuit. Officers observed the driver throwing an object out of the window, which was later found to be a .38 caliber revolver. The chase continued until the Chrysler broke down, billowing smoke from under the hood. The driver stopped abruptly in the middle of the road and opened the door. A pursuing police officer on a motorcycle crashed into the open door, causing the officer to fly over the handlebars and fall to the ground. Fortunately, the officer was not seriously injured. The perpetrator then attempted to flee into the nearby woods, but was quickly caught by the police and taken into custody. Courtney Lockhart was born on October 20, 1984. According to his family, he was a pleasant and fun-loving person before enlisting in the U.S. Army. However, after serving in Iraq from 2004 to 2005, he returned as a changed person. His mother described Courtney as a cheerful individual, but after his return from Iraq, his behavior drastically changed. He stopped smiling, became paranoid about people standing behind him, and would often hide in closets or under the bed. In 2006, Lockhart's personal life took a toll when he had a daughter with his ex-girlfriend. The same year, he was court-martialed for assaulting fellow soldiers, using illegal substances, and abandoning his unit without permission. As a result, he spent 7 months in detention before being dishonorably discharged from the Army in December 2006. In the following years, Lockhart's life spiraled out of control. By 2008, he had become increasingly troubled, neglecting his personal hygiene, abandoning his responsibilities as a father, and developing a severe addiction to illegal substances. Between February 2008 and the time of his capture, Lockhart committed a series of burglaries using a consistent modus operandi. Courtney Lockhart targeted women, approaching them from behind in parking lots as they got into their cars. He would threaten them with a gun, demand their purses, and try to take their cars. Tragically, one of these crimes ended in the death of Lauren Burke. Lockhart's string of assaults came to an end on March 7, 2008, when he attacked a 72-year-old woman but failed to escape a police pursuit. After his arrest, Lockhart, then 23, confessed to the police that he was responsible for kidnapping and killing Lauren Burke. The police interrogation, which was recorded on video, became a crucial piece of evidence in the trial. Additionally, the police found Lauren's personal belongings, including her iPod and bank cards, in Lockhart's car. Lockhart provided a detailed account of the events leading up to Lauren's death. On Tuesday, March 4, 2008, he woke up in his silver Chrysler Sebring, which he had been sleeping in near the East Alabama Medical Center. Desperate for money, he drove around Auburn looking for another victim to target. It's notable that Lockhart exclusively targeted women, never men. He eventually ended up on the campus of Auburn University, where he parked near the student dorms and spent several hours watching students from his car. At 8 p.m., Lockhart saw a girl, who turned out to be Lauren, casually walk up to the car parked next to him and open the door. Without hesitation, Lockhart grabbed his revolver and approached Lauren from behind. He poked her with the gun muzzle and demanded to know how much money she had. When she didn't respond, he forced her into the front passenger seat and got behind the wheel himself. Lauren was initially silent, but then screamed in fear. Once she calmed down, she handed Lockhart $200 from her purse, begging him to leave. However, instead of leaving, Lockhart threatened her with a gun, ordering her to remove her clothes. Lauren complied, leaving on only a pair of socks. Lockhart's motivation for making her undress was his mistaken belief that she would be less likely to try to escape without clothes. Lockhart then drove around Auburn, holding Lauren at gunpoint with one hand while steering with the other. Lauren attempted to talk him out of his criminal actions, and when he claimed his life was over, she promised to help him find a job in an effort to de-escalate the situation. Meanwhile, her phone started ringing, and Lockhart instructed her to answer it and make up an excuse to avoid arousing suspicion. Lauren was supposed to meet Michael at the library, but when he called to confirm, she claimed to have forgotten and quickly hung up. Later, Lockhart drove her through the city streets as she persistently begged him to release her, offering to help him overcome his personal struggles. As they drove down Highway 147, Lauren made a desperate attempt to escape by opening the car door and trying to jump out while the vehicle was still moving. In the ensuing chaos, Lockhart admitted to accidentally firing a shot, which tragically pierced both of Lauren's lungs, and she also sustained injuries from the fall. Lauren regained enough strength to wave at passing drivers, but soon lost consciousness. Lockhart, who had abducted her, parked his car outside a church and watched as people began to stop and assist Lauren. Realizing the police would soon arrive, he hastily left the scene, planning to destroy evidence he had left in his car. Lockhart drove to a gas station, where he used Lauren's bank card to buy a can of gasoline. He then doused the interior of his car with the gasoline, got back in, and drove to the campus where he had initially taken Lauren. His Chrysler was parked there. As he drove, Lockhart became lightheaded from the gasoline fumes, so he rolled down the windows to let in some fresh air. Once he arrived on campus, Lockhart stole $46, an iPod, and Lauren's bank cards from her car. He then set the car on fire and drove away in his Chrysler. At a gas station, Lockhart filled up his tank using Lauren's money, then returned to campus. However, investigators began to question Lockhart's story, suspecting that he had ulterior motives for making Lauren undress. They thought that Lockhart's goal was not to prevent her from escaping, but rather to exploit her in some way. When Lauren jumped out of the moving car, Lockhart's true intentions were foiled. The investigators were skeptical about Lockhart's claim that he accidentally shot Lauren. Given his military background and experience with guns, it seemed unlikely that he would accidentally discharge his weapon. Instead, it appeared that Lauren realized she was in grave danger and decided to escape by jumping out of the car, at which point Lockhart intentionally shot her. Forensic tests confirmed that the bullet found in Lauren's car was fired from the same gun Lockhart had abandoned during a police chase. Expert analysis also ruled out the possibility of an accidental shot, as the trigger required significant force to fire. On March 9th, investigators questioned Lockhart for the second time. The next day, he was officially charged with multiple crimes related to Lauren Burke's case. The trial started on November 8th, 2010. Lockhart's lawyers argued that their client suffered from a mental illness due to his military service, and that Lauren's shooting was accidental. According to court records, Lockhart pleaded not guilty, citing mental defect or insanity as the reason. Lauren was initially silent, but then screamed in fear. Once she calmed down, she handed Lockhart $200 from her purse, begging him to leave. However, instead of leaving, Lockhart threatened her with a gun, ordering her to remove her clothes. Lauren complied, leaving on only a pair of socks. Lockhart's motivation for making her undress was his mistaken belief that she would be less likely to try to escape without clothes. Lockhart then drove around Auburn, holding Lauren at gunpoint with one hand while steering with the other. Lauren attempted to talk him out of his criminal actions, and when he claimed his life was over, she promised to help him find a job in an effort to de-escalate the situation. Meanwhile, her phone started ringing, and Lockhart instructed her to answer it and make up an excuse to avoid arousing suspicion. Lauren was supposed to meet Michael at the library, but when he called to confirm, she claimed to have forgotten and quickly hung up. Later, Lockhart drove her through the city streets as she persistently begged him to release her, offering to help him overcome his personal struggles. As they drove down Highway 147, Lauren made a desperate attempt to escape by opening the car door and trying to jump out while the vehicle was still moving. In the ensuing chaos, Lockhart admitted to accidentally firing a shot, which tragically pierced both of Lauren's lungs, and she also sustained injuries from the fall. Lauren regained enough strength to wave at passing drivers, but soon lost consciousness. Lockhart, who had abducted her, parked his car outside a church and watched as people began to stop and assist Lauren. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Cassandra Canrell. Cassandra and her twin brother Rob shared a unique bond, fueled by their love of scary stories. As kids, they'd spend hours in a darkened room, taking turns telling each other spine-tingling tales. Rob fancied himself a master storyteller, but Cassandra would always scream at the end of each story, teasing him about not being scary enough. They'd also watch Scooby-Doo together, debating which characters might be ghosts or vampires in disguise. Cassandra's instincts often proved correct, leaving Rob on edge. Their mother, Mary Smith, encouraged their love of reading by buying them books by Robert Wall. What started as a childhood hobby evolved into a lifelong passion for horror. As adults, they even collected villain figurines and considered opening a horror-themed store. An interest in horror movies brought Cassandra to the set in 2004. She got a cameo in a scary movie that, although it didn't become popular, still caused a storm of envy and led Rob to start asking his sister to make a deal for him. He asked her if she had made some acquaintances there and said he was ready to play anyone. He urged her to talk, adding that he was pretty close with the head of the cast and maybe something would come out of it, but he made no promises. Cassandra replied that she had gotten the part by accident herself. Rob was very happy, but despite his enthusiasm, he was not able to play, even in an episodic role. The lead actor in the movie was Colin Dudley, and on set, he and the debutante actress felt an undeniable chemistry. However, neither of them dared to take the first step. That was until they attended a corporate Halloween party together. Cassandra dressed up as Velma from Scooby-Doo, while Colin went as Alex from A Clockwork Orange. The costume held a deeper significance for Colin than just a simple character. It seemed to resonate with him on a deeper level. He had been walking with a glass of milk all evening, looking at everyone with a glare, just as his character had done in the movie. He had also quoted a lot from the book. For example, he had looked at Cassandra with delight and had said that beauty invariably caused his only desire to destroy it, for it did not fit at all into their ugly world. Cassandra had thought it was a compliment, and they had soon started dating, but their relationship had not lasted long, only a couple of months. Colin had found another actress, Rebecca, and had started dating her, and later on, the couple had started living together. On August 25, 2020, Cassandra Canrell vanished without warning. She drove away from home in an unknown direction and failed to respond to phone calls. When her mother, Mary Smith, reported her disappearance to the police, they were initially reluctant to take action, suggesting that Cassandra might simply be out with friends and would turn up soon. But Mary was convinced that something was seriously wrong and pressed the police to investigate. It took 2 days for them to begin searching for Cassandra, and on the third day, they found her car parked under a bridge in a notorious neighborhood known for its high crime rate and homeless population. The car was unlocked and the keys were still inside. The discovery raised more questions than answers. Why was Cassandra in this dangerous area, known for its frequent violent crimes and drug-related deaths? The police had to canvass the neighborhood, questioning homeless individuals who, unsurprisingly, were hesitant to cooperate with the authorities. The residents living under the bridge, who spent their days drinking, had no information about Cassandra's whereabouts or when her car arrived. This lack of knowledge was hardly surprising. The detective in charge of searching for Cassandra had obtained her cell phone billing records, as per protocol, but based on his experience, he doubted it would lead to any useful leads, and indeed, it didn't. The signal from Cassandra's phone indicated it was in the nearby body of water under the bridge. Unfortunately, this meant the detectives would be unable to retrieve the phone and access the crucial information it held. Prior to conducting a thorough search of the coastal area, a team of divers stood on the shore and tested the distance they could throw rocks into the water. This test would help them gauge the likelihood of finding the phone. Cassandra's mother had mentioned that her daughter's phone case was adorned with distinctive rhinestones, making it easier to spot. As it turned out, the phone was soon found, but sadly, Cassandra's body was not in the water. While the detectives presented this as a positive development, Cassandra's mother remained distraught and unconsoled. She seemed to have gotten used to the idea that her daughter was dead, and the only thing she wanted was for her body to be found and for the nightmare of uncertainty to end. She sadly mentioned that she had been looking forward to her granddaughter, wanted to be a grandmother sooner, and didn't even have time to give her a crib, which was just sitting in the garage in a box. She wondered what she should do with it now, not realizing that this became important information for the investigation. According to statistics, a large number of crimes against pregnant women are committed by their partners. However, Mary Smith's daughter, Cassandra, was not married and did not have a partner. Despite her age, Cassandra was not in a relationship with anyone. Mary was puzzled because Cassandra had gotten pregnant, but she had no information about the baby's father. Cassandra had been in frequent contact with someone, often calling and messaging them. However, the phone number of this person was not recorded in Cassandra's phone book, and Mary couldn't remember the number. This lack of information left Mary in the dark about the identity of her future grandchild's father. Cassandra frequently communicated with a person without saving their number, which was unusual. Typically, girls couldn't keep their relationships completely secret and would confide in at least one friend, especially when it came to sensitive topics like pregnancy. In this case, the friend was acquainted with police officers. In conversation with the police, Cassandra revealed that she had reunited with her former boyfriend, Colin Dudley. Although their initial relationship in 2004 was brief, it was surprising that they reconnected after 15 years apart. What was even more unexpected was that Colin, with whom Cassandra worked on a movie set in 2014, was the one who reached out to her. Colin reached out to Cassandra on Facebook, expressing condolences and sharing the recent loss of his father, with whom his wife Rebecca had a troubled history. Cassandra, motivated by kindness, agreed to meet Colin to offer comfort, but their encounter blossomed into a romantic connection. From 2014 onwards, Colin led a double life, juggling 2 families, with Cassandra as his mistress. When Cassandra discovered she was pregnant, she chose not to inform Colin, recalling his earlier statement that he didn't want children and was happy with Rebecca's infertility. Fearful that revealing the pregnancy would disrupt his primary family, Cassandra kept the news secret. However, as her belly grew, it became increasingly difficult to conceal. To avoid arousing Colin's suspicion, Cassandra stopped seeing him. Cassandra knew she couldn't keep her secret hidden forever. Lying about having another boyfriend would hurt Colin and lead to their breakup. So she made the difficult decision to tell him the truth. She was pregnant with his child. Over the phone, Colin initially remained silent, but then surprisingly expressed his delight at the news. Cassandra believed he was genuinely happy about it. Meanwhile, a detective arrived at Colin's house and knocked on the door. Colin's wife answered, and the detective, not wanting to discuss Colin's missing mistress in front of her, introduced himself as an old friend of Dudley's, avoiding any awkwardness. Colin quickly left the house with the detective, shutting the door behind him, and walked away from the house without even waiting for an introduction. He seemed to have been expecting their meeting. Colin thanked the detective for being discreet about his credentials in front of Rebecca. He spoke in short sentences, explaining that he had heard Cassandra was missing and found it extremely strange. He admitted he couldn't even guess where she might have gone. He told the detective that Cassandra had confided in him about her fight with her brother and was worried about it. He had advised her to make amends, but didn't know if she had taken his advice. The detective already knew about the fight between Cassandra and her brother, Rob, who had spoken to him about it. Rob had refused to meet with Cassandra on the day she disappeared, which he now regretted. Colin blamed himself for not being able to prevent her disappearance, thinking that if she had visited him that day, she might still be safe. Colin confessed to the detective that he wasn't a good person and acknowledged his past mistakes. He had secretly dated his ex-girlfriend, Cassandra, while still married to Rebecca, knowing it was wrong. He believed that his actions would have consequences in the afterlife, but insisted that he couldn't help who he fell in love with. After his father's death in 2014, Colin resumed his relationship with Cassandra, fulfilling one of his father's wishes. He had broken up with her soon after Christmas, which his father had criticized him for. His father had liked Cassandra, unlike Rebecca, whom he hated. Colin explained that living a double life for 5 years had been exhausting and guilt-ridden. He made excuses to hide his late-night returns, pretending to go on business trips or fishing, which he despised. He even bought fish to deceive Rebecca, who would cook them, despite the smell making him sick. Colin mentioned that Cassandra was pregnant, but didn't know who the father was. He heard from a close friend that Cassandra claimed the baby was his, which he found hard to believe. Lately, Cassandra had been avoiding him, and he understood why, as she wanted a family, something he couldn't provide. The detective asked Colin when he last saw Cassandra, and he replied that he couldn't remember, guessing it was around 3 to 4 months ago, except for a brief encounter at the mall when his wife was in the fitting room. Colin asked the detective if they thought they would find Cassandra alive, and the detective assured him they were doing everything possible. However, this wasn't Colin's last encounter with the detective. The police discovered that Colin was the owner of the unsigned phone number Cassandra's mother had mentioned. It turned out that Cassandra had frequently called Colin, including on the day she disappeared. Additionally, CCTV footage from the train station near the bridge where her car was found showed a suspicious man on the platform. The suspect wore a disguise, covering his face and head, making it impossible to identify him. However, the detective noticed that the man's gait and hat were eerily similar to those of Colin Dudley and Alex from A Clockwork Orange. The detectives followed the suspect through CCTV cameras, watching as he entered a cafe, left, and drove away in a car with a license plate registered to Colin Dudley. Armed with a search warrant, the police searched Colin's house, hoping to find Cassandra alive in the basement. Initially, they found no evidence of a crime, but they did discover the hat Colin had worn as a disguise. In the basement, a service dog trained to detect blood scents began barking, suggesting something was amiss. Colin claimed innocence, stating that the police were trying to frame him due to a lack of evidence and suspects. His wife was shocked and upset, but when asked if she thought her husband was capable of murder, she hesitated before saying no. Despite the circumstantial evidence, there wasn't enough to imprison Colin, frustrating Rob and Mary Smith and leaving the detective feeling helpless. Colin was questioned again, and he provided an alibi, stating that he had visited a hardware store on the morning of August 25th to buy cleaning supplies and trash bags. However, the large trash bags raised suspicions. The police also discovered a deleted text message from Cassandra stating that she was approaching Colin's house. Additionally, phone records showed that the couple hadn't left the house for hours that morning. Colin had turned off his phone, but accidentally left Cassandra's phone on, allowing the police to track his movements, including his presence on CCTV cameras. After the murder, Colin went to a cafe to clean up, then drove to the pond where he had thrown away Cassandra's phone, which the police had tracked to its last signal. Now, the police needed to find Cassandra's body. To retrace Colin's route, the police took a GPS tracker from his car, which showed that it had followed the same path as Cassandra's phone. The next day, the police followed Colin's path through the woods and found a large trash can tied with ropes in a ravine. The area around it was covered in blood, and it was clear what was inside. After a month, identifying the body was difficult, but the police were able to do so thanks to a tattoo described in the missing persons report. Colin was arrested and charged with murder. A forensic examination revealed that Cassandra died from a fractured skull caused by blunt force trauma. The police also found traces of blood in the basement of the Dudley house that couldn't be fully cleaned. Rebecca, Colin's wife, had been in a different part of the house and hadn't heard anything. She also revealed that Colin had never wanted children and had lied about her infertility. The police considered this a motive for the crime. During the trial, due to a lack of witnesses and physical evidence, the jury couldn't be convinced that Colin had committed the murder. So, the court offered Colin a deal. If he pleaded guilty, he would get a shorter sentence. Colin was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Cassandra's mother and brother were devastated, feeling guilty that they hadn't met with Cassandra before her death, and that the killer would likely be released one day. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Carol Maltese. Carol Nicole Maltese was born on September 19, 1995, in a small province in Italy. She was the only child of Fabio and Josephine and had a mix of Italian and Dutch heritage. When Carol was just 4 years old, her parents got divorced, and she stayed with her mother. Her father moved back to the Netherlands, got remarried, and had more children. Carol's mother, Josephine, chose to stay in Italy and raise her daughter on her own. Despite her former husband's lack of support, Josephine worked multiple jobs to give Carol a good education and a better life. Carol grew up to be a kind, sociable, and beautiful girl with many friends. She was active in sports, particularly horseback riding, and loved to dance. She was fluent in 3 languages, enjoyed traveling across Europe, reading, and could talk about almost any subject. As a teenager, Carol became a stunning beauty with a slim figure, and she loved being the center of attention. After finishing school, Carol went on to study industrial design, arts, and fashion at a technical university. She quickly became one of the top students in her class. Carol began dating a young man, a year older, and studying architecture and design during her freshman year. When she was 20, she discovered she was pregnant, which came as a shock to both her and the father. Despite being unprepared, Carol decided to keep the baby. In 2016, Carol gave birth to a son, and she and the father were forced to drop out of school due to financial constraints. They moved to Verona for better job opportunities to support their family. Carol landed a job as a sales consultant at a cosmetics and perfume retail chain when her son turned 1, while her partner worked from home and took care of their child. In mid-2019, Carol started an affair with Angelo, secretly meeting him in hotel rooms and exchanging messages at night. However, just before the new year, the father of her child discovered her infidelity and ended their relationship. Carol thought it was for the best to leave, since she was already planning to move in with her new boyfriend. However, a complication came up. Angelo still lived with his parents, and it wasn't possible for Carol to move in there with her child from a previous relationship. So, they made the decision to rent a place together instead. When the economic crisis hit, they lost their jobs and couldn't afford their apartment. Carol moved in with her new boyfriend's parents and made the difficult decision to leave her 4-year-old son with his biological father until things got better and she could bring him to live with her. As the economic crisis worsened, a self-isolation regime was put in place, and everyone was forced to stay at home. Carol struggled financially during this time and relied on Angelo and his parents for support, unable to contribute financially to her son's care. To make matters worse, Carol's mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which required expensive therapy. With no other options, Carol desperately sought ways to earn money from home to support her son and ill mother. She turned to social media and YouTube, sharing her experiences of living in isolation and the challenges she faced in an effort to generate an income during the lockdown. Carol's early blog posts didn't gain much traction, but her attractive appearance caught readers' attention. She received flattering comments as well as some inappropriate proposals. One subscriber suggested she join OnlyFans, a platform where her looks would be in high demand, and she could quickly become a star and earn a lot of money. Taking this advice, Carol created an account under the pseudonym Charlotte Angel and began posting provocative photos and short videos. She quickly gained a large following of paying customers. While Carol's earnings increased, she kept her new career a secret from her boyfriend and close family members. As time passed, Carol's content became more explicit and sophisticated as she worked to satisfy her fans. She herself found enjoyment in this line of work. However, Carol was able to keep her secret hidden for only about 6 months before someone she knew discovered her account. The news spread quickly, and soon everyone knew how she was making a living. Carol's friends and family in Italy didn't understand her decision to work in the adult film industry. They saw it as immoral and were embarrassed to be associated with her. Carol, on the other hand, was confident that her work was a form of art that could bring her success, wealth, and fame. As she became more popular, adult film studios and directors approached her with offers to star in their films, which she accepted. She started participating in group shoots and public performances, but her boyfriend Angelo was still in the dark, thinking she was working remotely as a designer. However, when Angelo finally found out the truth, he was shocked and unsure of what to do. But when his parents discovered Carol's profession, they demanded that he break up with her immediately, fearing that she would bring shame to their family. Carol's OnlyFans account had become extremely successful, earning her enough money to rent her own place and attracting offers from directors. Her fees continued to rise, and she professed in interviews that this was not a long-term career goal. Instead, she planned to eventually complete her education and pursue a career in design or modeling. For now, she was enjoying her work and was well compensated. Despite her success, Carol frequently spoke about the constant moral pressure she faced from others. Their judgments and attempts to shame her led to feelings of anxiety and guilt. However, she defended her work as a form of art and believed that every woman should have the freedom to choose her profession without fear of judgment. Carol started anew in Rescaldina, Milan province, leaving her adult film career behind and working as a sales consultant at a perfume boutique. However, this fresh start was short-lived. She met David Fontana, a 42-year-old banker and nude photographer online. He was seeking a model, and Carol responded, feeling an instant attraction during their first meeting. Despite being married, Fontana pursued a relationship with Carol, and they began dating, combining photo shoots with intimacy. Fontana learned about Carol's past and encouraged her to return to filmmaking, recognizing her talent. He had complex feelings for her, loving and possessive, yet also enjoying seeing her in adult films. After divorcing his wife in March 2021, Fontana moved in with Carol, and they explored their explicit fantasies together. He assisted her in creating popular content on OnlyFans, taking a share of the profits from their joint ventures. Carol's success in the adult film industry led to her receiving lucrative contract offers from foreign directors and studios. However, her boyfriend Fontana became jealous and reacted angrily when others showed interest in her. Months later, Angelo, who was still in love with Carol, reached out to her and confessed his feelings. He proposed that they get back together, promising not to interfere with her work. Carol was touched by his words but revealed that she was already in a relationship with someone else, David. Despite this, Carol and Angelo continued to stay in touch. However, when David found out about their communication, he became furious and threatened Angelo. He even went as far as setting Angelo's car on fire. Angelo reported the threats and property damage to the police, and a restraining order was issued against David. However, there was no evidence to link David to the arson, so he didn't have to pay for the damages. As Carol's popularity grew, she traveled frequently for shoots and gained over 30,000 followers. She was saving money to buy a home, take her son with her, and eventually leave the adult film industry to focus on raising him and finding a new job. Meanwhile, she started creating custom videos, which became a profitable venture. Carol received scripts from fans who paid her to bring their fantasies to life. She continued to work with Fontana on filming and editing, and they shared the profits and lived together. In September 2021, she met Salvatore Galdo, an actor, on a film set, and they started working together on explicit films. As they worked together, Carol and Galdo developed real feelings for each other, and they began a romantic relationship in secret, afraid of how David, her current partner, might react. She waited for the right moment to tell David everything and end their relationship. A few months later, Galdo proposed to Carol with an engagement ring, and she happily accepted. By the end of the year, she had saved enough money to buy her own home. Carol planned to take her son, Mary, with her and decided it was time to talk to Fontana about her decision. Fontana took the news surprisingly well, understanding that Carol was moving on to her new partner. However, they still had unfinished projects that they had already been paid for, so they agreed to complete the work and then go their separate ways. Carol's sudden and mysterious disappearance in 2022, similar to Carol's earlier vanishing act, left everyone stunned. She abruptly stopped acting in films, discontinued her online streams, and ceased communication with colleagues. Moreover, she refused to accept new project offers from directors. Although many people were aware that Carol had planned to leave the entertainment industry, her complete disappearance still came as a surprise. Carol's friends and husband, Salvatore, grew concerned when she stopped responding to their calls. Despite her reassurances via social media, they sensed something was amiss. Months passed, and Carol's occasional social media posts revealed she'd gone on a seaside vacation without telling anyone. Her brief, curt responses only added to their unease. On March 20, 2022, a passerby discovered large black trash bags near a rocky cliff in the Italian community of Borno. Upon approach, the passerby found human fingers poking through the torn polyethylene. He immediately reported the gruesome find to the police, who discovered 4 bags containing a human body divided into 18 parts. The remains were so disfigured that identification seemed impossible. Forensic experts determined the young woman had died at least 2 months prior, but the cause of death remained unknown. It was clear the body had been stored in a freezer before being dumped, likely to keep it hidden. The criminal had removed distinctive features, tattoos, and skin pieces, then burned, cut, and doused the skin in acid to conceal the tattoos. Despite this, investigators pieced together tattoo fragments and matched them to a missing persons database. A news report about the body led a woman from the adult film industry to recognize the tattoos as belonging to a missing colleague, Charlotte. This information allowed law enforcement to identify Carol, who had become engaged to her coworker, Salvatore Galdo, before her disappearance. What's curious is that he didn't report her missing. Salvatore became the prime suspect, but his distraught reaction and conversation history with Carol seemed genuine. However, his story didn't add up, leading to another suspect, David, being questioned. David showed up at the police station to report Carol missing, oblivious to the recent discovery. His nervous, contradictory story eventually led to his confession. He had accidentally killed Carol. David Fontana claimed to be filming a scenario for a client who had paid a large sum of money. The script involved binding a woman, taping her mouth shut, covering her head with a bag, and brutally beating her with various tools, including a hammer. David was supposed to pretend to inflict severe pain without actually harming her. However, he allegedly went too far and struck her with a hammer, fracturing her skull. Instead of calling for help, he ended her suffering with another blow. Panicked, he dismembered the body and stored it in his freezer for over 2 months before deciding to dispose of it. The investigation revealed that David was the mysterious client who had orchestrated the entire scenario to exact revenge on the woman, Carol, who had decided to leave him. During the torture session, he extracted her phone password, which was supposedly part of the script. On January 11th, David fatally struck Carol with a hammer and used her credit card to buy a freezer, saw, and axe to dismember her body. He disfigured the body to prevent identification and stored the parts in the freezer for over 2 months. During this time, he communicated with Carol's relatives and friends on her behalf, creating the illusion that she was alive. By the end of March, David decided to dispose of the body by dumping it off a cliff. However, the remains were discovered 2 days later, and authorities tracked him down within a week. At the trial, David expressed remorse and claimed that he loved Carol and had taken her life unintentionally. Despite his claims, the court found David guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 30 years in prison, ordering him to pay compensation to Carol's son, mother, and the father of her child. Surprisingly, the dismemberment of the body was not considered an aggravating factor, making David potentially eligible for parole.